In the annals of religious scholarship, few names shine as brightly as that of Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou. Her work is a testament to the relentless pursuit of knowledge, a journey that has taken her through the corridors of time, unlocking the secrets of the divine. In this extraordinary documentary, How Yahweh Became God, we delve deep into the groundbreaking research and profound insights of Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou. As a scholar, professor, and author, Dr. Stavrakopoulou has dedicated her life to peeling back the layers of history, exposing the transformation of an ancient regional deity into the omnipotent God of monotheism. Her tireless exploration has taken her to archaeological excavations, dusty libraries, and sacred sites, where she has unearthed the relics and revelations that challenge the very foundations of our beliefs. Through her meticulous scholarship and fearless pursuit of truth, Dr. Stavrakopoulou has illuminated the evolution of Yahweh, providing a profound understanding of the deity's journey from a tribal god to a cosmic force. But her work isn't just about the past. It's a gateway to understanding the intricate tapestry of faith, culture, and human history. As an educator, she has inspired countless minds, nurturing a new generation of critical thinkers who challenge the status quo and seek a deeper understanding of our shared spiritual heritage. Join us on this enlightening journey as we explore the remarkable life and groundbreaking contributions of Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to embark on this intellectual odyssey with us. Together, we'll uncover the mysteries of how Yahweh became God through the lens of a true pioneer in the world of biblical scholarship. Prepare to be inspired and enlightened as we delve into the work of Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou.
Welcome to the channel again, Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou.
Hi, it's nice to be back.
Thank you so much for joining me. You have such, well, I was on your Wikipedia page just showing people, I don't even know where to begin on how to present your background. You've been part of documentaries and shows, The Bible's Buried Secrets. You have an extensive CV, if you will, with a lot of credentials. If you don't mind, tell us what your book is about and, if you will, some of your background as we're diving in.
Yeah, so the book is basically about the early career of the God who's described and adored in the Bible, and it's basically tracking his early career from the kind of the late Bronze, early Iron Age, through up into, well, basically to about the 6th century of the Common Era. But what I do is I basically do an anatomy of God. I argue that this was a deity who was understood to have a corporeal form. He had a human-shaped body and a male, masculine body. And I basically try to explore the reasons why this deity was gradually disembodied culturally and theologically to become the God that we're kind of more familiar with today in Western cultural constructs. So yeah, that's what the book's about. I'm a professor of Hebrew Bible and ancient religion at the University of Exeter in the UK. I'm an atheist, always have been, always will be. And I did all my degrees at Oxford and my postdoctoral work before moving to Exeter.
Absolutely amazing. Your book was, I must admit, it's my favorite book right now, honestly.
Yay.
I've been reading a lot of different books and I'm like, okay, this is by far my favorite one. So I figure I'd just lay out the outline of this episode because it's difficult with your time and my schedule and all of us trying to figure out what works.
And the time difference.
The time difference that plays a significant role. So I have some questions that I have come up with throughout your book, and then we can get to the Q&A, allowing anybody who super chats to get your question answered, and we will try to do that in a timely fashion, of course, but still get your question answered, because I know there's a lot of people who have a lot of questions for you, and I still have questions for you. So I'm impressed. I reread it again. This is the second go around, and I realized I missed so many things. I also want to mention, if anybody who's watching this really wants to help us out, you can join our Patreon. I'll let everybody know early. I'm going to be interviewing John Dominic Crossan here in the next week down in Florida while I'm on vacation. I'm working while on vacation with my family, interviewing ex-cult members, you name it. Like, I'm all about this. I am a humanist as well. So if you're interested in learning more and helping us here at MythVision, you could join and help us out. Okay. I love this book. I cannot, I can't put enough energy into that. I wish I could download it, just plug it in, and people could go, oh, he really, really loves this book. But I must start somewhere, and it's with this goddess called Inanna. Inanna and Yahweh. And on your book, page 202, I made sure I stopped it. I wanted to read something, if I can. Did you want to grab your book, by the way?
I was going to say, my God, I can't remember what's on page. No, whatever. No, it's the book's there. You read it.
Yeah, and I don't
got a copy of my book.
An atheist miracle happened because I ended up getting this copy in America. Remember, I don't know how I did.
Yeah, that is amazing. It's come out. Look at this. It's come out in Italian recently, which looks very beautiful.
Ooh, so they're changing it up.
Yeah, like the German cover is different, and it's all because obviously the US cover is different too. So
awesome. Well, I'm going to read and obnoxiously have your book up while I do so. So for in Hinduana, I hope I'm saying this right, Inanna is a deity so powerful that her divinity surpasses even that of the highest gods, An and Enlil, who have willingly ceded their wisdom to her. In your vast wisdom amongst all the gods, you alone are majestic, Hinduana exclaims. In this poem, Inanna not only governs the forms of wisdom graciously bestowed upon mortals, such as expertise in warfare, ritual, economics, sex, and medicine, but curates and controls the divine wisdom underpinning the very foundations of the cosmos. To destroy, to create, to cut apart, to establish, Inanna are yours. To turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man, Inanna are yours. A large and expansive heart, Inanna, are yours. Almost 2,000 years later, another poet was crediting just one deity with the wisdom to create and destroy, and for him, it was Yahweh.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on this just briefly?
Yeah, so that's there I'm talking about a particular poem from Mesopotamia that was written by what we understand to be the world's, the first named author that we know in the history of the world, who's a woman, Enheduanna. She was the daughter of a king and also a priestess. But she, whether or not she actually wrote this poem is kind of debated by scholars. It may be that it was a poem to which her name was ascribed. But nonetheless, what it reflects when she's kind of praising the goddess Inanna, who was she's also known as Ishtar. So Inanna is her Sumerian name. Ishtar is her Akkadian name. So these are two different languages that were used throughout the ancient Near East. But yeah, she's praising the goddess Inanna as basically being just, the most supreme deity imaginable. And what she's doing when she's talking about the various divine qualities and functions and roles that Inanna has, she's saying that even the high god, so the god An, who is basically heaven, has given Inanna, his daughter, these particular gifts. It's a way of kind of talking about this kind of fluidity that we see in divine functions and roles, in that you can, even in a deeply complex polytheistic system, you can single out a particular deity, and that deity is held to basically almost incorporate all divine qualities and roles and functions. And Inanna is incredibly important because she was probably the most important, across ancient Southwest Asia, but particularly in Mesopotamia. She was probably the most important deity in some ways, the longest. Her importance kind of stretched the longest throughout, over millennia. So it's an incredible poem. But yeah, it kind of shows this very elevated, sophisticated, complex role of divine functions for a goddess that are the kinds of things that we find, thousands of years later in the Hebrew Bible. We find that Yahweh is being described in similar ways.
Would you be willing to say that Yahweh's Johnny come lately? That's how I feel. I hate to be that way because a lot of people go, oh, well, atheists like you are antagonistic. You're trying to find something before. And all you have to do is have a Justin Martyr come on the scene and go, well, Satan knew, that's why. But it's still silly.
Yeah. Like the thing is that it's very difficult. You know, one of the big kind of theological premises on which a lot of biblical theology is founded, is the idea that Yahweh was somehow extraordinary, that ancient Israelite religion was somehow different from the religions of surrounding peoples and cultures, and that somehow that extraordinary quality means that this deity is a deity wholly unlike any other deity across ancient Southwest Asia. You know, that's what we find, you know, Yahweh himself saying in the Bible all the time. In Isaiah, in Deutero-Isaiah, so chapters 40 to 55, he's like, I am God, there is no other, there's nobody else like me, I am the only kind of deity. But, you know, historically, we know that that's just not the case. You know, things are rarely, I'm not saying that that you don't get innovative shifts in religious thinking and religious imagination, of course you do. But there's nothing particularly unusual about Yahweh. There's nothing particularly extraordinary about him. So for the various different sorts of roles and functions and titles and you know, we find, you know, examples of those used much earlier of lots of different types of deities. So this was part and parcel of a much broader cultural landscape. And Yahweh, if you like, is kind of like a local iteration of broader understandings of what deities, you know, successful deities, frontline deities, were supposed to be doing.
I must skip to something interesting in my commentary about Inanna, or Ishtar, if you will. And I'm vindicating, Dr. Richard Carrier wrote an article about dying and rising gods. So I made this really cool documentary little video about this that I thought was interesting. And he talked about how Inanna, this goddess, was, you know, with all this power, is kind of lowered or defamed, if you will, taking off, stripped naked, then made into a corpse, then hung on a hook for 3 days and 3 nights, and then is brought back to life, or something like 3 days, something to the same motif we see with Jesus, we see it with Jonah, we see it with other mythologies. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that particular myth about Ishtar Inanna I talk about in the book, and it's very much the goddess's decision that she wants to take over the underworld. I mean, she's a seriously kick-ass, ambitious goddess. I adore her. But she's that idea of her sort of being stripped of all her divine, her bling, basically, her accessories. These were more than just kind of decorative items that were worn on divine bodies. A bit like high status human bodies, these were ways of making the body, of rendering a body complete. So by stripping off, you know, her headgear and her necklaces, she kind of deliberately diminishes herself because she has to in order to enter the underworld. But yeah, some people think that that's an example of a dying and rising god. It's not quite. I mean, yes, she's turned into a corpse, a kind of like a hunk of meat, basically. So it's about her kind of debasement in very material terms. The whole debate about dying and rising gods is really complicated. I think the main ancient Southwest Asian, pre-Christian ancient Southwest Asian myth that we can certainly say is a dying and talks about a dying and rising god is a myth concerning Baal from Ugarit. So late Bronze Age, Syria, the city-state of Ugarit, the modern site name is Ras Shamra. And in that, Baal is defeated by the god Mot, who's the god of death, who swallows him, because death is a swallower, which is where we get all that imagery in the Bible about, you know, when the ground opens up and swallows kind of idolatrous priests. That's exactly what's going on there. The underworld swallows
Jonah, the fish.
Yeah, exactly. Jonah being swallowed by the fish, exactly. But yeah, with Baal, he is certainly dies because his sister Anat and the sun goddess Shapsh go into the underworld to find him, and they find his corpse. He's buried in a tomb, and then about 3 days later, he is restored. So that, I mean, and you know, and that is like I said, there's very little in the Bible that's completely original.
I love this. Thank you for coming on. You're awesome. So God's being so concerned with food. This is something as well. But before we get to that, Ezekiel and Genesis. This is something I thought was fascinating because I always read the Bible as a Christian and always thought Genesis is the beginning, Revelation at the end. It's written in the chronological order in which they were really written or something, because you're not told all these things. But you mentioned about this in Ezekiel. You know, it talks about this king, this ruler who says in his heart, which is like where you think in the ancient world.
Yeah.
The organs or your heart, which is down here, is actually where you think, not your brain. But we're not going to go there because I think you said that plenty of times on your other episodes. I really want to get something unique out of you in terms of this. So I will rise above the throne of God. I will sit upon.
Yeah, he wants to go up the holy mountain and sit on the throne of El, the high god. Yeah,
and this was written before Genesis' account, or Genesis.
Yeah, so it's kind of complicated. So the story that we have basically Genesis 2 and 3, the story of the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. It's not a fall; it's an expulsion. Has a lot of similar motifs to a lot of material that we find in Ezekiel, and in that material in Ezekiel is probably older. So that's probably, kind of 6th century, but drawing on an older motif, whereas the story that we find in Genesis is probably about 5th century. But they both share the same mythic kind of schema or trope, in which you have this, the first human, who across ancient Southwest Asian mythologies, the first human was generally understood to be a paradigm of the king. And the king was understood, the role of kingship, because a lot of these texts and myths were produced within royal high status contexts. So the first man is the paradigmatic man is the royal figure, the king, who is made and appointed to perform various tasks on behalf of the deity in the earthly realm. So the Ezekiel myth does talk about an anonymous ruler who, in the context in which we find the myth, is probably to be identified as one of the foreign kings that's harassing Yahweh's own people, like an Assyrian king or a Babylonian king, or possibly an Egyptian king, but probably Assyrian or Babylonian. And he says, I will ascend the holy mountains, I will make myself like a god. I will sit on the throne, on the seat of the gods in the divine council on the top of the holy mountain. And God, who here is the terms used for God are both El and Yahweh. He's like, no, you're not. I'm not having this at all. I'm gonna, you're gonna die like any mortal. You're not a god. One of the kind of qualities of divine nature in some ways is kind of perpetual immortality. So even if, like Baal, you die, you don't die forever. You don't stay dead. You come back. So this king is expelled from this holy mountain, which in Ezekiel is also called Eden. It's this beautiful garden of God. He's expelled and sent down into the underworld, where he obviously dies, and then his corpse is exhumed and trampled by enemies. So this is about kind of wiping him out in every possible way. In the ancient world, you only exist for as long as you're remembered. So even after death, you have a post-mortem existence, and you continue to have a social relationship with the living. But if your tomb is desecrated, if your bones or your remains are destroyed, if you're eaten by wild animals and shat out on the ground, that basically is completely eradicating you in a material sense, and therefore you can no longer be remembered, and you no longer exist. So that's what happens to this king. But it looks like a lot of that myth that we find, in a way, that Genesis material and the Ezekiel material are both later reflections of what looks to be an earlier kind of mythic trope about one divine or semi-divine figure trying to usurp an older, more senior divine figure and kind of being taken to task for it.
It just always excites me to learn this stuff. What about the gods and food, right? So they're always concerned about food and not eating their food in the ancient world. Or says gods being so concerned with food and not you, humans, mortals, eating their food in the ancient world. Did the temple's demise change the understanding of God eating in Jewish thought? So I kind of wanted to get the idea, we're talking about him being a corporeal deity who needs to eat. Now he doesn't have food.
Yeah, exactly. Because when we use the language of sacrifice in our own cultures today, we have the sense of that it's something like that we're giving up something, that it's hard for us to give up something. It's something very precious. But sacrifice in the ancient world, you didn't just sacrifice living things, animals or the humans sometimes. You could also sacrifice all the other things that were important and sort of the mainstay products of human consumption. So you can sacrifice wine and beer and honey and oil and bread and fruit and cakes. And so sacrifices in temple economies were a way of not only getting money into the temple, but it was a way of sharing a meal with the deity. So say if I was a worshipper, actually let's say you, because we're talking about a very masculinist kind of culture here. If you wanted to go to the temple because you want to petition the deity for a particular kind of blessing, you might take, I don't know, a lamb or a couple of pigeons, and you would take these to the temple. The priest would sacrifice it on your behalf, and then some of that food would be burnt on the altar as food for the deity, who would smell. Was constantly told in the Hebrew Bible that Yahweh is attracted to the sweet aroma, the pleasant aroma of sacrifice. Kind of you know how like when you can smell the barbecue and you're like, God, that smells really good. It's like that. So it calls the deity into this social relationship around the altar with humans. And so the deity would eat part of that sacrifice normally, and then the priests and other ritual officials would eat the rest, and then you would also get a little part as well. So you're kind of sharing in a meal with the deity, and this was a way of basically forging and maintaining a social relationship with the god. So just as the same way that food times, like meal times, are important social family occasions for all of us, think about the big festivals that we celebrate, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever it is. Food and a particular kind of feast is a focal part of that, and that's because it's about this sense of bringing a community, a group of people together. You forge and maintain social identities and relationships, and that's exactly what temple sacrifice was about.
As far as the eating that really caught my attention, you did it really well in making me think of something I never thought about, and that is God just got done flooding all humanity. Let's forget that there's earlier Mesopotamian myths that really give us the precedents for why this is, and they kind of give you a different reason in the biblical account, getting God off the hook for just being annoyed for noises and whatnot. But here is like this complete genocide of the human race. And here's this one guy he finds, is like, well, you know what? I like Noah, okay? And his family can have this little group. Noah gets the barbecue up as soon as dry land comes up, and God smells it.
Yeah.
And am I correct in assessing this and saying God was ready to eradicate all, and then he smelt that meat, and he said, why did I kill all these humans?
It's not so much that he said, it's not so much he says, why did I kill all these humans? Because within the kind of narrative arc of that story, and obviously that story between Genesis 6 and 9 is drawing on all sorts of different other traditions. So it's been kind of edited and redacted and shaped into a kind of a narrative. But within that narrative frame, you've got the sense that God's not pissed off. He doesn't regret. He regrets that earlier, he floods the world because he regrets having made humankind, because they have become so corrupt, mainly through having sex with divine beings. But that's another story in Genesis 6 that we can talk about. But so when he smells the smell of the sacrifice, of Noah's sacrifice, it's then when he says that he decides that he will never again flood the earth, and not just he will never again destroy humankind, he will never again destroy living creatures. So it's a kind of a covenant, a relationship, an agreement with non-human life as well as with human life, which I think is quite an important theological point given the state of the world and the climate crisis at the moment. It's quite an important point, for these kind of particular Christians who think that the earth is ours to exploit no matter what. I think that's a really important theological point in those particular traditions. About
as far as the food goes, though, because they're so he's butthurt about Adam eating this fruit. It's obvious that food is so important in the ancient Near East for the gods. So I kind of wondered if that sacrifice he made to God, what made an impact where he kind of has this I've starved before, where I'm feeling like I'm dying, and then a fresh plate of barbecue comes before you, some really fresh cooked meal, and then it's I am thankful for everything. I am willing to start over, a fresh start, because that food was everything to me. I wondered if that food played that kind of role in God's mind of you know what, man is continually wicked, his heart's continually wicked, it says in the context there. So I'm thinking it's tomato, look, you made me some food, and I'm really I don't know if that made him convinced that he didn't want to do this. I think
because again, within the narrative arc of the story, this is the first sacrifice that's offered. Yes, you've got Cain and Abel offering their sacrifices in Genesis 4, but then that whole generation, so that's pre-flood humanity. They've been wiped out. Noah is the only one left, and so this is the first kind of bonding moment, that new agreement with the new humanity that is going to, stem from Noah and his kids and their families. And so, it's exactly that thing about sitting around a table and this idea of forging intense relationships, social relationships. That's exactly what's going on with that sacrifice. And it's, and it is, he smells the pleasing smell, and it pleases God. He wants sacrifices. So yeah, then fast forward to the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, first in the 6th century BCE and then again in 70 CE. The loss of the temple, for those scribal communities who are producing a lot of these texts, the loss of the Jerusalem temple was huge. And so when the temple's not there, if you can't sacrifice, then that doesn't necessarily shift theologically the way in which you might understand those sorts of offerings to function for the deity.
I really, really appreciate your answer there. I was going to ask, I'm going to skip the least important ones because I really want to get to some of the questions from our audience. Of course, idols are technically a derogatory term for other gods, which is better understood, and you do not beat around the bush, shit gods. So you mind telling us what a shit god is and what the language is? And I want everyone to please get the book. I cannot brag enough about it. So please tell us what a shit god is, or better yet, an idol.
So we get the word idol from the Greek Bible. So in other words, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. That's where this, and quite often the Greek term idol particularly translates a Hebrew word, gilulim, which is a plural term, which basically is best translated as shit gods. It comes from a word that means that's used of dung, or kind of rolled up, like balls of dung, rolled up poo, basically. And it's a term that we particularly find in the book of Ezekiel and other kind of priestly type literature. And it's a way, again, of debasing cult statues of deities. So Yahweh probably had his own cult statues within certain worshipping communities. Obviously we have the prohibition on images in Deuteronomy and Exodus, which you don't tell people not to do something unless they're doing it. So the term gilulim is used as a deliberate way of really talking down, it's shit talking, basically. It's really talking down the cult statues of other deities. Because don't forget, cult statues were understood to be the deity. They weren't just a representation or a symbol. They were understood to manifest the deity. That's where that term comes from.
About Baal, where I use this recently because this is my new Bible. I'm like, okay, remember when Elijah is talking to the Baal, the priest of Baal, and he says, where is your God? Did he go, and is he defecating? Now,
he's basically said, why is your God not answering you? What your prayers? Maybe he's busy, maybe he's on journey, maybe he's taking a shit. Is basically like what Elijah says to the prophets of Baal. Yeah, and it is that sense. So, I mean, there was a sense that some, in some cultures, there was it's perfectly well understood that deities might defecate. It's not something that we ever find ascribed directly to Yahweh, but that kind of taunt that we find in the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, it shows that the kind of scatology played a big role in theology, and that's exactly what's going on with Ezekiel's language of the shit gods, the gilulim. It's kind of like trying to smear them with something, render them dirty, and ritually dirty, as well as kind of conceptually base, I think.
This is going to sound a little awkward, but the next question I have is about the Sabbath and seventh day idea. There's a guy who's floated around on the internet, those in the chat know. He's been very kind to me, don't get me wrong, but he's gone around bragging victory over all these academics that I've had on and saying we're all under a seventh day calendar. And this all started with the God of the Bible, a seventh day calendar. Therefore, we're all technically responsible and, we are under this God's jurisdiction. So we are all technically sinners who need to repent to this God because this is the true God. Look, we have 7 days. And I was reading in the book. Right, I know. And I was reading the book. The origin of the seventh day Sabbath was my question. Maybe you have a thought on, but you mentioned a Sumerian lament where Inanna is singing to Enlil because he is sleeping while his people and their land are in famine on page 256. Maybe I can read it, teasing people to really get this book. I can't tell you how much I'm impressed with this. The goddess Inanna traveled from her temple to Uruk to Nippur in the hope of rousing Enlil, feigning my father's fanes lying down, she cried. May I soothe his heart, may I pacify his liver, may I direct my words to his distressed heart. Sitting on his lap, she sings him awake with the refrain, O sleeping one, how long will you sleep? Inanna's lament was considered so powerful that her cult singers recited it in her temple at Uruk on the 7th day of each month in the hope of appeasing the gods for any unknown misdemeanor which might prompt untimely or stimulated slumber. Precautionary measures were only sensible. Discerning the difference between a sleeping god and a sulking god was not always easy. Many centuries later, in the 6th century CE, Yahweh's worshippers were singing petitions to awaken him to the devastating aftermath of the Babylonian attack. Rouse yourself. Why do you sleep, O Yahweh? Awake. Do not cast us off forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's lots of stuff to unpack there. I mean, the 7th day is a very significant number in a lot of ancient Southwest Asian cultures, and so time is very commonly divided up. I mean, not always. I mean, in some contexts, like in certain Egyptian contexts, the number 10 is very important. But 7 is very common in a lot of ancient Southwest Asian cultures as a means of marking time, and probably primarily, scholars think, because that you could see 7 planets in the night sky, with the naked eye at that time. So these seem to, it was a particularly powerful, special number. So it's not unusual to have 7 pop up a lot across these cultures, and not unusual to have the idea of a period of time being 7 days was not unique to Yahweh worshipping cultures either. So that's one thing. I mean, the idea of the bit that you read is when I'm talking about the notion that for a lot of Yahweh's worshippers, inaction, divine inaction or divine neglect could be understood to reflect either a God who was sleeping or a God who had simply withdrawn. You know how we all kind of, if you're kind of depressed or tired or sulky, you take to your bed and you just don't want to engage with anybody. Right. It's kind of a similar kind of thing for the gods of the ancient world. They might just withdraw socially completely. And so when in that particular poem that I referred to in the Hebrew Bible, arouse, wake up, O arm of Yahweh, that's because that was written in the time of the Babylonian destruction and exile. So destruction of the temple, the exile of elites to Babylonia. And they're saying, they're singing to Yahweh's arm, his fighting arm, wake up, you have to kind of rescue us from enslavement in a foreign land. You have to come and fight for us. They just assumed that his withdrawal is because he's sleeping, so he has completely disappeared from their lives. So that was very common.
The idea of Sabbath meaning 7, but also is rest, is that this is predating the Bible by millennia. I mean, the Yahweh cult is late, Johnny come lately again, right, on this notion, but the unique way that they've kind of instrumented it to be, that might be unique, right? How they've made it into be, or is there a Sabbath that preceding this culture where they're resting with their God?
I mean, yeah. I mean, some scholars would certainly argue that in certain cults of particular deities that you had a Shabbat, a day of rest. And that was as much for the deity as it was for worshippers. But yeah, like I said, there's very little that is kind of purely innovative in some ways. Like when you're looking at these kinds of the ways in which the ritual calendar is organized, and the ways in which certain sacrifices function, the ways in which certain, ideas about what a temple is, what a deity is, there's I'm not saying there's nothing innovative, but the grand shape of things is not particularly exceptional in that sense. But I mean, I like the idea of, we've got this sense that, the Sabbath, Shabbat is a day of reflection and kind of theological thinking, and not working because you're meant to be focused very much on the idea of being in this relationship with the deity. But you get a particular verse in Exodus in which, Yahweh himself is talking, and he sort of says that, on the 7th day, he had to catch his breath because he was tired, having made the universe in days 1 to 6. He was tired, or he was running out of puff on the 7th day.
You see that in the Hebrew,
that
right?
Sense of rest. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we're not reading
Hebrew,
that.
Yeah, in the Hebrew, in that particular verse in Exodus, it uses the same word that's used to describe the kind of catching, someone who's been doing hard manual labor, kind of like sitting and resting and catching their breath like that. It's the same word that's used, which is a really nice image. I mean, it's a very companionable image, isn't it? Kind of likening it, kind of theologically, it's showing that God put all this exertion and work into creating this beautiful world. So in some ways, it's kind of nice.
Yeah. In some ways, and then in other ways, I kind of want to emphasize the ancient construction worker God was. In fact, he must be the first person who was ever making humans from clay, I suspect, right? I'm being sarcastic here to read a part of your book, page 277. Again, I love this, by the way. I cannot tell you. I'm like, I pause the Audible, and then I go in and I write it down, and then I get the page and I'm highlighting. It's my Bible. Clay shaping bodies had long been a ritual actively undertaken by both gods and mortals. In a Sumerian myth, the ingenious god Enki and the birth goddess Nenma had crafted the first humans from clay. What's this? Peopling their temples, I think. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Peopling their temples, farms, and fields with worshippers devoted to their service. In a related tradition, the goddess Mami chanted an incantation as Enki trod the clay for her to shape into people. At Ugarit, it was processed similarly performed by El, who had made an exorcism goddess from clay to cure King Kurta. I shall create a remover of sickness, an expeller of disease. He fills his hands with the best of clay. He pinches off that which is used by a potter. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the god most frequently associated with the creation of humans was Khnum, who crafted all living things, including some gods, on his potter's will. I love that. You are the master of the will. Who is pleased to model on the will? You have made humans on the will. You have created the gods. You have modeled the small and large cattle. You have formed everything on your will each day in your name, Khnum, the potter. That sounds like the Bible, but way earlier.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, clay shaping is, the one that it was the most important substance in some ways within these particular cultures, because it's so, it's there, it's everywhere. I mean, you need good quality clay to make kind of like a figurine or whatever. But it's the base stuff of life, the understanding that humans are made from, not just humans, but other living beings were made from clay, as you've demonstrated, wasn't just a biblical kind of idea. It was a much older, far more widespread idea across ancient Southwest Asia. So yeah, the idea that humans made, when humans made their figurines of gods out of clay, they were mimicking the gods themselves who made humans out of clay. So it's the primal matter of life in these particular cultures. But yeah, it's a lovely image, and yeah, like I think that's why it's so important to set these biblical texts within their broader cultural context, is because otherwise you get all sorts of claims being made about the innovative, unique status of certain theological ideas, and therefore they are so exclusive that therefore they must be true. They're not. But it's they're all drawing on a much wider, broader, richer cultural tradition, and it's just that Yahweh just happens to be one God among many, who but he just happens to be the God that's kind of survived into the modern day, unlike Inanna or which is such a shame. I'd much rather be her still around.
I wish we knew a lot more too about these gods that come before, because we kind of only know from our tradition what's being preserved, and I just wish we knew a lot more. I have a few more questions. I have 3 more, in fact, and then I'd love to get into Q&A. And Dr. Stavrakopoulou, if I may, I would love to send you a gift in some way for your time, because I literally, I seriously appreciate you. And there's so many people who've been anticipating this. Right now, we have, to give you an example, 535 people watching live right now.
Wow.
Yes, we have a large audience watching, and I want to make sure I try to cover their super chats. So that means I'd like to send you some money for your time, because I value it. I seriously do. With that being said, if I could get my 3 questions and then we just try to get through the super chats, I'm asking you not to hate me in advance, just because, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right. So as far as the curse thing goes, speaking of curses and blessings, Cain gets a curse on his forehead. You mention in your book that priests would put a sign on their forehead or something in the temple, and the priests would wear a mark in the temple on their foreheads. Does this play any role in Cain's curse? You do say it does in some way. Can you tell us what's going on with that?
I think this is basically about amulets. So it's basically about so if you think about the way in which so in the Shema in Deuteronomy, Yahweh via Moses tells the Israelites that they are to write the words of all this Torah, this law, bind it on their hands and bind it on, it should be like an amulet between their eyes. So this is the, for those of who are familiar with kind of very traditional Jewish practice, this is tefillin, so the little boxes or pouches that are worn on the head and on the hands. So these are kind of like almost like power words that act as amulets. Amulets aren't kind of just a good luck charms. They are apotropaics. In other words, they ward off harm, they ward off evil. And that's exactly what happens with the high priest. In certain biblical texts, the high priest has to kind of write the name belonging to Yahweh on his head before he goes into the temple, because it almost like protects him from the dangerous glare and presence of the deity. And so in the same way, even though God is mega pissed off with Cain because he offers the wrong kind of sacrifice, poor guy, not even told the rules, do you know what I mean? And he offers the wrong kind of sacrifice. And then he kills his brother, but which is the bigger crime, let's face it. And then so he's expelled again, like his parents were expelled from Eden. Cain is then expelled from the presence of Yahweh, and he has to kind of wander around, to the edges of the world. And he worries that he's going to become, he's going to be a target. He's going to be a target for hate crime, and sort of vigilantes. And so Yahweh writes a protective mark on him, which again seems to, so it's the idea that writing, not just the words that are written, but the actual presence of the written words of any kind of word, the presence of writing was almost like a magical, powerful amulet, and it could protect. That's why you have writing in tombs and that kind of thing. It protects the dead in their tombs, much like these amulets on the high priest's head and on Cain's head protect them from harm as well.
This was practiced well before Yahweh in
it's
Samaria.
very common. I mean, that's why stamp seals or cylinder seals, these little things that are pressed and rolled, inscribed, pressed or rolled into wet clay to seal jars of olives or to seal documents or whatever. They also functioned as little amulets. You wore them on the body. They were made of stone or sometimes bone, and they weren't just jewelry. They were like protective amulets as well, with like writing on them. So it's all a part and parcel of this much broader world in which words like inscriptions and images worn on the body could play this kind of protective role, like an amulet.
It's almost like people who feel lucky when they wear their cross and they're out somewhere and they just feel like they have protection. Well put. Okay, so there's this really old face. 9,500 years ago, worshipers most desire to be face to face with God, right? In the Bible, we talk about it. Moses just wants to be face to face, and he actually is face to face with God in one account. And then, there's even this weird hint in the New Testament. Marcion seemed to reflect when he says like Jesus said that no one has seen God except him. So how is Moses seeing God if he's saying that no one has? So you kind of wonder if Marcionism has some leg up in the New Testament. I don't know. I'll leave that up for you guys to debate. Point is, everyone wants to be face to face with God, but they're also terrified at what might become of this. So you mentioned this concept of the Jericho skull that's 9,500 years old, possibly older. Do you think this stems from that far back? I mean, we're talking about Göbekli Tepe kind of. When I'm talking about the Jericho skull, so this is like Neolithic, this object, and and I'm sure like your viewers will know, but these are these plastered skulls that we find. So somebody underwent head modification when they were a child, when they were born, they were selected for this process when they were born. They had their heads bound and then lived a normal life, and whenever they died in adulthood, buried under the floors of their homes, which was a normal kind of process then in those particular Neolithic cultures. Sometime not too long after, the body is exhumed, the head is removed, the remnants of the flesh and skin scraped away, and then the face is reshaped with clay and then painted, it's rubbed shiny, it's kind of given a red pigment or hue. Some have little moustaches painted on them, some have kind of like these wigs of like rush hair, and I mean they're really super cool. But these heads sit up on their own. They're kind of reshaped and remolded with plaster to sit up on their own, like the way they sit up in museum cabinets today. They just kind of sit there.
And it's a way of creating an otherworldly being. And I use this example of the Jericho skull in my book to talk about the ways in which, even without talking, without touching, it's that sense of being face to face with another being, even an otherworldly being, as the Jericho skulls are meant to represent. We don't know whether they were ancestors or gods. I don't think they were either. I think they are just some kind of otherworldly being, because these faces were remade and reshaped several times over for almost like different ritual purposes. But it's that sense of coming face to face with the otherworldly, and that's what that really kind of represents. So then it's not directly related to what we have going on in biblical traditions, but it's that same sense of just how important faces are. That's why we see faces wherever we go. Do you know what I mean? You see faces in the clouds, in the shape of clouds, whatever. It's because I think we're built as humans to see other social beings and to recognize them. It's like why we're fonder of animals that have faces that are a little bit like ours, rather than eyes round here and noses down here. I don't know.
It's a good point. Like it's like a proto-evolutionary explanation of what ended up creating what we ended up believing about things.
Some cognitive science of religion scholars who kind of look at the ways in which certain kinds of patterns or tropes of behavior are very much bound up with our evolutionary cognitive genetics and development and context, and they would argue that that it's a basic kind of human premise to imagine our gods as like us, basically.
Thank you for that answer. I've got one more, and this is I'd love for you to take whatever amount of time you want with this. It's a complicated question I've asked myself on MythVision for many years now, actually. And then I'd love to get into our super chats. Like I said, I want to gift you with something for your time today. And no more question super chats, please. I put that down in the banner because they take time and we don't want to leave people hanging. You're more than welcome to show love and support, a little shout out, but I really don't want to take too much more time of Dr. Stavrakopoulou's coming on here. So she wants to see my email and not go, that guy again. No, thank you. So my last question is this. What are a few reasons you think a historical Jesus, because you started your research with this question, exist over the mythicist model, whatever model you want to put? Are there a few things in your head that make you go the direction there was probably a guy? And can you give us those examples?
Yeah, there was probably a guy so not the guy that's described or talked about in the Gospels, certainly not the guy that's described or talked about in, some of the later Christian traditions and texts. There was probably a guy, and the only reason I say that is because of the relatively short period of time in between, and I'm kind of radical in a lot of ways, but I'm not that radical. So I think it's a relatively short period of time between the writings of, say, Paul, which are like mid-50s, and the likely execution that occurred. I reckon there was a guy who was executed. And my main reasons are probably a lot of the stuff that's said about John the Baptist, interestingly. I think that's trying to it makes sense to me that there was a John the Baptist type. We know there are lots of these kinds of figures wandering around. Honey, the circle drawer, is one of my favorites. He was like kind of this failed kind of figure. No, he wasn't failed. He was very popular. He was like, he had his methods, basically drawing circles and standing in them. But the kind of John the Baptist Jesus thing, that looks to me like a massive kind of polemic as a way of trying to say, what's the relationship between these two figures? John the Baptist had his head cut off. This Jesus guy, was crucified. So you've got two kind of executed figures who have been brought together. That to me suggests that there's somebody is trying to reconcile these two popular kind of cult leaders. So it's that and the kind of the relatively early date of the Paul stuff. But Paul didn't meet the guy. Paul's very clear that he didn't meet the guy at all. So who knows? But whoever he was, I suspect that at the very least, there was probably a guy, or maybe a series of guys or leaders, but one of them was executed, and it was devastating. I don't think he resurrected from the dead. Equally, I don't think that a lot of those reports of encountering Jesus after he's been crucified, I don't think they necessarily are indexing the idea that these people thought they'd seen a resurrected body. I think, this was, people encountered the dead and the shades of the dead all of the time in those cultures. So I don't see that as kind of proof of anything at all.
I agree.
I kind of flip on that. Yeah, it's more probable than improbable that some guy existed and was executed. Probably had some kind of relationship with a kind of John the Baptist type figure. But beyond that, who knows?
So you wouldn't rest your soul on this? Oh, yeah.
I know.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I like gambling.
Yeah, I like to tell people that if you're wanting to make sure you don't go to hell, become a MythVision member of the YouTube channel or join the Patreon. Do you want to really risk it? I don't think you do. So please do so. All right, I'm going to your super chats. And once again, thank you for everybody who supported us today. I want to just get that out of the way. Let's get to your questions. No more questions, super chats. Let's roll. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat. I hope this isn't too off topic, but what's the opinion on Hinduism being the oldest organized religion?
Oh, I don't know. It depends what you mean by religion. It depends what you mean by organized. It depends what you mean by oldest. Hinduism isn't one of my areas of specialty at all, so I feel very unqualified to comment on it. But I think like most religious movements or bodies, or I think it's got very, very ancient roots. When we see it as becoming organized as such, I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, is Judaism really organized? Is Christianity really organized? I don't know. Because you look at the differences in Christianity alone, there are so many different flavors and so many disagreements. It's hard to know. So I don't know what the opinion is on that, but there's a great guy at Rutgers University, his name escapes me, who is an expert on these kinds of things. So look him up, he'll know.
Thank you so much. No, and just so you know, I have a lot of academics. The best thing they do say is, that's out of my field, or I'm not certain, I wouldn't want to give you that. And so it's a respectable response. Don't mind me using the rag here from time to time. I just, we talk about tears too, where the water flows and stuff. Anyway, that's stuff you go into in your book. Constellation, thank you. ScholarVid, throughout your career, you have experienced significant pushback from the universities where you've taught against some of the hypotheses you've put forth. Is that true? And I'm going to put your book up while you're doing stuff. So
I've not had pushback from the universities I've taught at. In the UK, it's very different from the US. In the US, there's a lot of places that teach, that do biblical studies and stuff, which are very confessional. And so you kind of have to sign some faith declaration before you can teach there. The UK is very different. It tends to be, theoretically at least, very secular. I mean, obviously, a lot of my colleagues are Christian or Jewish or Muslim or whatever. So I've not had pushback from the universities. I have had pushback from students. I have had pushback from individual staff and colleagues. But yeah, nothing that I can't handle. So yeah, it's fine.
Well, can you give us one example? Just what's one that you would say is a big one that always comes up?
I think the one that always kind of has stayed with me is when I was very early in my actually when I was teaching at Oxford. I taught there for 2 or 3 years when I was doing my postdoctoral work. And there was a theological training college that was kind of affiliated to the university. And I was giving the main university lectures on the Hebrew Bible and the history of Israel and that kind of thing. And I was told that I had been blacklisted by students at this particular theological college because they felt that A, I was an atheist, B, I was a heretic, C, blah, 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 blasphemy, blah, 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 all the usual stuff. But that stayed with me because that was the first time. I was very early in my career. I'd only just finished my doctorate. And I was like, why would you not come to the Oxford University lectures just because you don't like the woman? Oh, woman lecturing.
Yeah, that's something I bet we could have an hour conversation about what your life in your career has been like as a woman. But yeah, maybe we can cover that at some point. I'd love that. Thank you so much for that. Esoterica, my buddy Justin Sledge, Dr. Justin Sledge. Do you think there is any continuity between your study to the later Shi'ur? Is that Shi'ur Qamar?
Shi'ur Qamar. I talk about it in the book. Yeah. So this is a particular kind of mystical Jewish tradition, supposedly arising in kind of Roman era Palestine, but we find most of the text beginning to circulate around Europe primarily in about the 11th, 12th century CE. And the text literally means the measure of the body, and it's a way of talking about various aspects of the divine nature of God, of the Jewish God, but using the size and measurements of his body parts. So in that text, for example, the length of his nose is the same as the length of his little finger. But, you know, he's got this massive body, and it's a very mystical text. It's kind of like such a specialist esoteric text. It's got lots of links with the sort of medieval forms of Kabbalah. So yeah, I talk about that particular text in the book.
Yeah, in one of your parts in the book, I always get a chuckle when I come across it, because I was an evangelical. Like, God was spirit, which meant invisible, which meant, you know, other than the body of Jesus, which, you know how that works. You go into all of that. But the idea, God is hung more than a horse. Okay, like has the biggest penis. So for those guys out there who think you're going to compete, we just might as well give up and stay what we are, mortals. Your book is very blunt, so I feel like these blunt conversations are necessary to just point out this is what the God of the Bible is. So Impossible is Nothing. Thank you for the super chat. Just got Dr. Stavrakopoulou's book from Amazon. Loving the education. I was hoping to luck out like Derek and get the blinged out UK cover, but alas, I got the basic American cover. Oh well.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. It's so, I don't understand why. I mean, publishers know better than me. I don't understand why the American publishers, who are a great publisher, Knopf, but why they decided to go with the red cover and a picture of God's dad driving a car, which looks like to me driving a car. But yeah, thank you so much for buying the book. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I did pin it at the top of the chat. Get you a copy. I don't know why I got this copy. I live in North Carolina in the United States, so I don't understand it, but thank you for that support. And I did put that up there, so please get it. Bonapal, thank you for the super chat. Was Yahweh a Midianite god before becoming an Israelite god?
I don't know whether he was a Midianite god. I mean, we know so little about these particular kind of designations that are given to particular territorial groups. But certainly, I suspect he came. I mean, we've got some of the oldest poetry in the Hebrew Bible gives him an origin, a location in what is now southern Jordan, basically. So I think he came from like that kind of red wilderness area that we associate. So what's called Edom in the Hebrew Bible is now southern Jordan. So some scholars, some of my colleagues are really keen on the Midianite hypothesis as a means of, so has this god somehow come up from what is now sort of the Arabian Peninsula and up? It's possible. But yeah, I think the most we can say is that he's kind of comes from down that way rather than up in the north as earlier generations of scholars used to argue. But yeah, I'd go with kind of, he comes from the southern Jordan area.
It's a complex issue because the data is not great. Thank you for the super chat. We have 650 people watching. Hit the like button. Get the book now because the apocalypse is coming. And when it comes, all you got to do is show the book and they won't hurt you. Dead serious. Jordan Kelp, thank you for the super chat. Do you think the original temple in Jerusalem had a large cultic statue of Yahweh? Thanks to both of you for the work y'all do. Thank you.
Do you know what? If I had to put money on it, I'd say that there was a cult statue of Yahweh in the Jerusalem temple in the Iron Age. I don't know how big it would have been. I mean, even within Mesopotamian, we know that they had like all sorts of different kind of cult statues. But even in Mesopotamian examples weren't particularly big. But if I had to put money on it, I'd say, I reckon there was probably a human-shaped, an anthropomorphic cult statue of Yahweh in the Jerusalem temple at some early stage. Was it there up until the destruction of the Babylonian temple? I don't know, but we do have some interesting, that language in the Hebrew Bible that talks about the Babylonian kings coming in and taking what's normally translated as vessels of Yahweh. It's the same vessels term that's used on the Moabite stone, which is dated much earlier to the 9th century about King Mesha of Moab and the Omrid dynasty of Israel. That too talks about the vessels of Yahweh being dragged. Vessels can also, it doesn't just mean, bits and pieces, bowls and spoons and stuff. It I think that probably means cult objects. So yeah, if I put money on it, I'd say yeah.
Thank you, Jordan. Wonderful question. Evangelical Humanist says, happy anniversary, Derek. Thank you. 15 years. She's put up with me that long.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. I am lucky. I am definitely lucky. My Asherah is stuck by my side, and I don't plan on ever getting rid of her. Stop scamming, man. I'm going to do better than Yahweh on this one. Stop scamming, man. Hi. Any thoughts on whether or not Solomon existed?
Oh yeah, I really do. Do you know what? It's so. I see the David and Solomon stories as reflecting two competing foundation traditions. That's why they're both kind of credited with building temples. So, oh yeah, it's David that says, I'm going to build a temple, and, and he picks the place, and he gets, the threshing floor, and he sorts it all out. Oh, but then it's actually his son Solomon that builds it. I think that these are two competing traditions about the foundation myth of the temple. And Solomon's name itself is really interesting because it looks like, it's kind of like it's such a common kind of construct of a name. But you have this really interesting story about David and his son with Bathsheba, this son that dies, and and the son is called Yedidiah, which basically means beloved of Yah. David's name is a play on kind of Dode, beloved as well. So, and Solomon's name, it just all looks these all look like kind of typological names in some ways. So I doubt that we can talk about a historical David or a historical Solomon. I'm not saying that these figures aren't drawn on older kind of traditions and myths about founders, perhaps legendary founders, perhaps some more kind of sketchy historical figures. I don't know. But yeah, if I would put money on there being a cult image of Yahweh in the temple, I wouldn't put money on Solomon and David existing.
Thank you so much. Stop scamming, man. Doc Pluromana, where the Tanakh speaks of God's anthropomorphism or anthropopatheism, Targumists seem to avoid such language, and the LXX seems to have toned it down as well in Deuteronomy. Is this stylistic rather than theological tendencies?
It's a bit of both. So when it comes to the LXX, some traditions, some texts in the LXX may well reflect earlier versions of the Hebrew than those that we find in the Masoretic tradition today. You get some of that in Samuel and Kings. It kind of looks a bit different. So it may be that it's a deliberate, and obviously with the Greek, we're looking at the 3rd century BC at the earliest as to when these texts started to come into being, these Greek texts, these Greek translations or versions. So by that point, I think, the idea, there's a growing discomfort with the idea of God's body, particularly if some of the LXX texts came from in and around the Alexandria kind of cultural sphere of influence, which was very much taken with certain sorts of notions of the immateriality of the divine, certain sort of philosophical ideas. So I think in some texts it is theological, in some it's stylistic, but there's a real blurring of the two, because particularly in the Targums as well, by this point, the idea of God having a body has been, the rabbis are still quite comfortable with the idea of God having a body, and they're very comfortable about talking about God's body and depicting him anthropomorphically. But when it comes to what you do and how you comment on certain scripture, whether it's biblical texts or other authoritative texts, there's a certain kind of reverence, the same reverence that we see, in which you don't say the name Yahweh aloud. So it might be written in the Hebrew, but you don't say it aloud. And that seems to come about relatively early too. So it's a combination, I think, of both stylistic and theological.
Thank you so much for that, Doc. Thanks for the support. Stop scamming, man. Does Deuteronomy appear to have a 6th century writing style?
Wow, that's a very specific question. A lot of you see, I see Deuteronomy as like, in terms of writing style, some parts of Deuteronomy look kind of a bit older. So some of the curses and blessings, for example, some scholars argue that this looks like a kind of a classical biblical Hebrew as opposed to a kind of a later kind of biblical. My feeling very much is that Deuteronomy as a whole reflects, there's obviously some bits of really ancient poetry at the end of Deuteronomy, which looks much older than 6th century. So some of those poems at the end, like in Deuteronomy 32, for example. But yeah, my feeling is that ideologically, when you read Deuteronomy, this is very much about a community who is not in the land. and let's take the land as being Jerusalem or whatever. This is about, there seems to me to be a post-exilic either reframing or manifesto of certain land territorial ideologies about a people who know what it's like to lose that territory and land, and have either just got back into it or are coming back into it. So to me, yeah, it looks kind of more, it actually looks more 5th century ideologically and theologically. It's very difficult to kind of be specific in terms of writing style. But some of that very old poetry at the end of Deuteronomy is certainly looks to have older bits in it.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate everybody viewing. 656 people. Over the last few years, stop scamming, man. Thank you. Has academia gotten any wiser as the origin and etymology of Yahweh?
No, everyone's still arguing about it now. Yeah, so there are various different theories. One is that the name derives, like etymologically speaking, that the name might derive from a verb meaning to blow. So could this index the idea of Yahweh being a storm god? You know, that would kind of make sense. Another possible kind of origin could be the idea of strength or striving, you know, all of these different things have been brought into play with Yahweh's name. But yeah, the long and short of it is very few people believe the biblical sort of interpretation of his name, which is that it comes from the, you know, the verb to be. Not very many scholars hold to that biblical idea. So yeah, we don't really know. We don't really know where it's from at all.
Well, thank you for that. Stop scamming, man. Oh, Flamio, why does Yahweh need money or food?
Oh, well, Yahweh needs money because his priests need money, because that's how you run a temple. But yeah, Yahweh needs food because he likes it. He enjoys it. There's a brilliant psalm. In one of the psalms, Yahweh, it looks to have been written after the temple was destroyed in the 6th century. And Yahweh says, you know, I don't need your sacrifices now. I don't need food. The whole world and everything in it is mine to eat, basically. You know, I don't need your sacrifices. The idea is that, again, it's that idea that animal sacrifice or any kind of food sacrifice is about the relationship between the donor and the recipient, and the divine recipient. So yeah, but he likes the smell of certain things. He likes the smell of incense, and incense wasn't just burned, you know, in braziers in his temples. It was also kind of sprinkled on his food. So like, it's kind of like a garnish. So that's what he realizes. The smell really pleases him, makes him happy.
It's very human. Thank you so much for that. Constellation Pegasus. Interesting to think 200 to 300 years ago we could get into trouble talking like this. Good to be in the 21st century.
That's true. But yeah, but then don't forget, like, there are some parts of the world where if I was to talk like this in public, it would still be. I've had emails from people based in the Middle East, a couple from Pakistan in particular, who had managed to get a copy of my book. And loving it. They're humanists and secularists, they're doing quite a, but obviously it's incredibly dangerous for them to be doing that kind of work, or any kind of to be irreligious or atheist is really difficult. But yeah, I do feel very privileged to be in the place and life that I am.
That is a wonderful super chat. Great response. Gnostic Informant, my buddy Neil. Thank you so much, Neil, for the super chat. Go subscribe to my buddy's channel. There seems to be and that's the gentleman I introduced you to before the show. Yeah. There seems to be tons of common tropes between the Inanna Ishtar descent story, Eleusinian mysteries, and Isis and Osiris myths. Do you think these ideas extend to Christianity?
I think possibly, because one of the things about a lot of these texts, that even if you've got a very early Sumerian myth or like a Babylonian myth, like these texts were carried on circulating for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. As, they were copied, and so they became a part. There were huge libraries across ancient Southwest Asia. So I think there's a sense in which certain kind of scribal communities, certain kinds of the intelligentsia in certain communities, they were very familiar with these kinds of stories and myths and tropes. And I do think there was a lot of traffic. It used to be like 50 years ago, people used to talk about the traffic of kind of like cultural ideas going from west to east, from Greece. And obviously I love Greece being like great in whatever it does because I'm biased, I'm half Greek, but there was a sense in which kind of there was a lot of cultural traffic going one way from Greece to the east. But recently, scholarship of the last 20 years or so, particularly with classicists, have really started to understand what ancient Southwest Asian scholars have been telling them for donkey's years, that actually the traffic was massively the other way as well, from going westwards into the Mediterranean. And so I think a lot of these myths and tropes were certainly circulating much earlier than people used to think. And I'm sure that there are some of those ideas you do see them working out in Christianity. Look at the iconography. Early Christian iconography is really interesting when you want to look at some of these motifs in particular, I think. Don't just rely on the text.
Yeah, there's so much. Oof, I love this. I'm glad I got my questions out of the way, so I can't be selfish. Stop scamming, man. Thank you again. Some of the Old Testament has God demanding incense and burnt offerings off others, abhorring them.
Yeah.
Is it just because God wearied of offerings from the impious, or does this represent a different theology?
Most of the context in which we find God saying, I despise your sacrifices, like he does in the book of Amos and similarly in Isaiah, most of those are very context specific, and it is about the insincerity, not just the insincerity of sacrifices. It's kind of like rich people making a big song and dance about, oh, look at these amazing sacrifices. Let's have another big feast and another big sacrifice. And he's saying he won't accept those sacrifices. He hates them because these are the gains, if you like, of social oppression and injustice. So he's often, when he's saying, I hate and I abhor your sacrifices, in the next breath, in the next verse, he's saying, because you trample on the backs of the poor, because you do, because you exploit this, because you take this. So there's very much a sense in which ritual offerings weren't something separate from the social kind of values of other aspects of society. So he's saying that, yeah, you might have all this money to offer up, these lavish sacrifices and offerings, but that means shit to me if you can't treat your next door neighbor with kindness. And again, that's kind of, a lot of people are really down on the Hebrew Bible. It's kind of saying, oh, it's the bad God. And, it's not at all. I mean, there's a huge amount of kind of social texture in those texts. And I think that's an example there of when you get kind of the very negative polemics against sacrifice, but normally because it's got a message about social justice on the flip side of it.
Thank you so much. Abel Chavez, thank you for the super chat. I heard or read that the name Yahweh has a correlation with the 4 letters of our DNA. Do you know anything about this? Perhaps we are making a god of ourselves and thus reincarnation in a long run?
I don't know anything about DNA. I don't know anything. I've not heard about this theory that the name Yahweh has a correlation with the 4 letters. I mean, one way to put the bollocks on that is to say, Yahweh's name was probably just Yah. In inscriptions that, we often see it as Yah or Yahu, just 2 letters. So, yeah, I do think we are trying to make gods of ourselves all the time, however. But yeah, I've not heard of that.
Me neither. Thank you for that super chat. Hengfa, do you know of a myth, I believe, out of Mesopotamia in which El goes to a dinner party and gets crazy, stumbled down drunk?
Yeah, I talk about it in the book. It's not a Mesopotamian myth, it's an Ugaritic myth. And I deal with that. El, the high god, is basically has a drinking party, invites all the gods round, things get kind of chaotic. El stumbles home and sort of basically pisses and shits himself and falls over. He doesn't fall over. This is about a kind of divine, it's got some of those motifs about divine descent into another worldly realm, a bit like in Nana sort of descending into the underworld. It's got kind of some similarities with it. But yeah, it's written on the same tablet, is written a hangover cure, which is the first, which again I talk about in the book, is the first known reference to the use of the hair of the dog as a hangover cure. And in that particular text, it literally is the hair of a dog that's put on the forehead. But, it's incredible how we get this expression in our own culture about the hair of the good dog as a hangover cure. So yeah, check it out. It is in the book. But yeah, it's a myth from Ugarit. So late Bronze Age.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's in the book. Get the book. I cannot emphasize that enough. We almost have 700 people watching. Doc Pleuromonot, if parallels with the Sumerian Dilmun and Eden Pass academic sniff test, is it potentially easier to identify a historical location based on a more accurate myth geography than the ambiguity in Genesis?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, so some people think that Dilmun is a particular island which it seems to have been in later Mesopotamian texts. But Dilmun also had this kind of mythological role as well. It was kind of like, before the gods had given, had given the gifts of kind of the cultural kind of qualities to humankind. So is it easier to identify a historical location based on more accurate myth geography than the ambiguity in Genesis? That's interesting too, because when I read the stuff in Genesis, to me it seems to be speaking about Lebanon. It's that kind of focus on trees, and in lots of different ancient Southwest Asian myths, Lebanon in particular was a place associated, with the cedars of Lebanon. This was the divine garden of the gods. This is the kind of the sacred forest that Humbaba or Huawa in Sumerian, Humbaba guards. And so some of that Genesis material and some of the ways in which Eden is described in older biblical texts, like some of the Psalms, in Ezekiel, for example, that seems to me to sound more like the kind of the sacred forest, which for some Sumerian communities was pretty much Lebanon. So I don't know if the Dilmun Eden thing will pass the sniff test, but there are similarities. But I've always kind of, my hunch would be that it's Lebanon, really, Eden.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that, Doc. Thank you, Dr. Stavrakopoulou, for coming back to MythVision. Is it possible to believe that Christians believe God is both corporeal and non-corporeal, given the Trinity? Loved your book.
That's a really, thank you for saying you got my book. That's a really interesting question. Is it possible to believe that Christians believe God? Yeah, and not so much given the Trinity, it's more given the Christian notion of incarnation. I mean, for Christians, that was one big reason why Christian theologians were very happy to move away from ideas of an anthropomorphic God and a bodied God, because for them, it wouldn't make sense, to have Jesus. Why, like, in some ways, Jesus is the kind of, you couldn't get the idea of Jesus being an incarnation of God himself if it weren't for the fact that you had much earlier in the religious DNA things like cult statues of the gods, things like the notion of God as having a male body, blah blah blah. Equally, you want to kind of, for Christians, it's the idea that this body has to be human in order for it to properly die, in order for it to properly resurrect, and that's really important too. So in some ways, Christians, I think the incarnation, the doctrine of the incarnation helps to kind of manage that tension and anxiety about divine corporeality and incorporeality. But then there are some Christians that do believe that God has a body. So, for example, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, some of those communities have very strong theologies in which God still has a body. I think the Trinity is a bit of a problem for Christians in some ways, but it's more the incarnation that's the biggie, I think, about this corporeal incorporeal tension.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Chidi, for the super chat, and thank you for breaking 700 viewers. We have 703 viewers right now. Hit that like button. Get her book. I cannot emphasize this enough. It is a must absolute have. Better than the Bible itself. Liliana Stone, loving her book. I have the red cover and plan to get the blue and gold when we visit London in July.
Thank you. Oh, enjoy London. I grew up in London. It's the best city in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed the cover as much as I do. Joel Pearson, should temples show lit smoky gold idols again?
Oh, I'd love that. That's one of the things that I particularly like about Eastern Christian churches. It's like, whether it's Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, whatever, go big on the bling. I mean, that's what, make this as an extraordinary otherworldly place. In some ways, a lot of Christian churches already have extended this idea about kind of cult statues of, gorgeous gold shiny cult statues of Jesus and Mary and the saints and blah blah blah. But then within certain Jewish traditions too, the way in which the Torah scroll is dressed and accessorized and paraded and venerated, is extraordinary too. To have that, it's almost like it takes the place of a cult statue. But just generally more incense, more bling. I'm very much up for that in sacred spaces.
Thank you so much, Joel. Inquisitive mind, I'm the ghost of MythVision, and my question is, where does the Islamic god Allah come from?
What, in terms of the name or in terms of culturally? I mean, culturally, Allah is basically, just like El. It just means deity. So in that sense, it comes very much from the ancient, what we call the ancient Middle East. But yeah, who knows? I mean, it may well be that there is a desert origin to that particular deity too. We don't know. In terms of the relationship between Allah and El, just like the relationship between Yahweh and El, I think there probably is one back in the kind of ancient divine DNA somewhere, way back in the story of these deities, emergence. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if somewhere along the line there is a common ancestor.
Thank you so much for that. Robert, thank you for the super chat, showing some love. Just getting through these here as we're wrapping up. I had one interesting question, if I can. The Messiah rides a donk. Where is the oldest evidence of Yahweh worship from?
It depends what kind of evidence you want. If you want evidence from biblical texts, then obviously you get some of that really old poetry that I talked about, Deuteronomy 32 as an example, some of the stuff at the end of Genesis. In terms of non-biblical evidence, one of the earliest references to Yahweh is probably the Mesha stela that I mentioned earlier, 9th century, written by King Mesha of Moab. So Moab is one of the Transjordanians, so basically what is Jordan now, who talks about Yahweh's temple and Yahweh being the God of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, the territory. So that's, I think, the probably, in terms of uncontested archaeological evidence, that's one of the earliest attestations of the evidence of Yahweh worship, because we've got mention of the divine name, references to temples, to a sacrifice, certain sorts of sacrifices and rituals being performed, the idea of this god as a particular patron of a particular royal household and territory and that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
It's early Iron Age, basically.
I really appreciate that. Cam's Kaz, thank you so much for the super sticker. Really appreciate the support. Let's see if we can get, like Gnostic Informer said, get 500 likes. Let's make those likes happen. Almost there. I just want to make sure I didn't leave anyone hanging here. I apologize, but I really didn't want any more questions. Thanks. Great book. Dr. S is fabulous. My buddy Jonathan Pierce, go check him out. A Tippling Philosopher. Subscribe. I actually was on his channel this morning hanging out with him. So we all love your work. And then the last one, why no one compares Yahweh with Mesopotamian god Ea or Ea? Don't they have similar myth role and roles? Couldn't Ea, am I pronouncing this properly, be the root of Yah?
In terms of, people do compare them, but the Mesopotamian traditions that we have about Ea are kind of tend to be older. In terms, textually, just tend to be older than the stuff that we have. I don't. You're looking at. This is where we get into philology, and Hebrew is very different in terms of as a language from the East Semitic forms of. So Akkadian is like an East Semitic kind of form. Equally, Sumerian is a language all of its own. It's not related. It's what's incredible about Sumerian. It's not related to any other language family. So like the way that Hebrew is related to Phoenician and related to Moabite and Sumerian is not related to anything, which is quite incredible. So people do kind of compare Yahweh with some high gods, but Yahweh is such a late player on the stage. By the time he pops up, early Iron Age, like the Mesopotamian gods have been around for for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm sure have a look at the work of Nicholas Wyatt, and who else would be helpful on this. Mark S. Smith might have some interesting stuff on those two deities.
Thank you so much. Comms Kaz, always wonder why all the gods to choose from, why Yahweh, why that particular one. We'll try and get the book. Definitely get the book. I would say the influence is obviously, depends on the influence culturally you're speaking of, and Christianity has helped the West, if you will, overall try to reach that. Thank you so much for that super chat. Did you want to answer like why that particular one? Wouldn't you say it's just it became the most influential with the Christianity?
I mean, in terms of why Yahweh in an ancient context, why was it Yahweh that particularly kind of rose to prominence? Because obviously El was kind of around, knocking around. It was part of a polytheistic context. How come this kind of prioritization of Yahweh? We don't really know. Partly, I suspect it's because Yahweh worship was very much tied to the political elites of statehood, and so was a patron deity, a personal patron deity to certain sorts of like royal families, like the Omrids in the Northern Kingdom of Israel. So I suspect that's why that deity gets promoted more and more and more, till eventually they become kind of the state deity. But yeah, I think it's primarily due to Christianity that it's because Christianity started off as a cult, a Jewish cult, and it's very difficult to really tell the difference, in some ways between Christianity and Judaism in Christianity's earliest kind of couple of centuries anyway. So yeah, it's once Christianity gets kind of once it's kind of approved of by the Roman Empire and becomes one of the kind of, I don't want to say state, kind of imperial religions, but it's basically becomes particularly promoted in the Roman Empire, that's when it really kicks off.
My final question, and with the 718 people watch, please get her book, like this chat, leave a comment even after the live. What do you think about the Mount Ebal curse tablet that was discovered? Are we waiting for peer review, and do you think it's going to come up, is going to flop? What do you think's going to happen if you were going to predict? Do you think he's overstretching everything?
Yeah, and in a way, I can, to be generous, I can understand overstretching, because in a time when getting funding for digs is so hard and getting funding for any kind of projects is so hard, you kind of want to sell it to those people that are going to, it's kind of, a lot of it is like evangelical Christian funded digs that are doing this. So it's overstretching it. I don't think it's like, no one in my field is excited about, we're not like, oh my God, this changes everything, because we don't even know, they haven't even opened the text. B, there's not enough to go on from what they do have. And C, never kind of say anything until we've had proper peer review. So, But yeah, I don't imagine it's going to set the world on fire, put it that way.
My buddy's a Greek guy, and he's like, that's Greek, dude. You got to pronounce that right. Hit the note, Pulu. Make sure you let him know,
Exactly.
So shout out Stephen Nelson. Thank you, my friend. Can you tell us just briefly your expertise as we go in? Because some fundamentalist is already triggered watching the title.
Yeah, I'm a professor of Hebrew Bible and ancient religion at the University of Exeter in the UK. I did all my degrees, including my doctorate at Oxford University, and I worked there for a good few years. And yeah, I specialise in the ancient cultural contexts of the societies that gave rise to the Bible, including obviously the Hebrew Bible.
A little bit of background about this book. I'm telling you right now, you will grow wings and go to heaven if you buy this book right now. I'm not kidding. I'm in North Carolina in the United States, which she was shocked when I showed the book. How did you get it? I don't know. Amazon sent this one to me. See,
I have so here is the American one. You can see like there's publishers have different ideas about marketing and stuff. So the US one is, it's nice, but the UK one is bling.
Like because you take us on a journey with the God's feet. In fact, I visualized half the things you said in the Bible, or in this book, about the Bible. And I don't know if I should have had my goggles on because a lot of it's X-rated, but you taking your shoes off and walking in the giant footprints of the gods at the base of the temple door, entering into the temple. And it made me think of the echoes of like Josephus saying that like God left the temple. Like it makes me think of things like that I never thought about. So your book was kind of trying to redigest or unlearn all of the things we have packaged on philosophically about God that did not exist biblically.
Yeah, that's exactly the point of this book. I'm trying to say we need to see this ancient deity in his natural habitat, and that natural habitat was a world in which a lot of the theological and philosophical preconceptions that we have about what the divine is supposed to be and its relationship to materiality, to being human. Those ideas are later post-biblical constructs. And so what I'm trying to do in this book is to really take seriously the sociality of what it was to be human, human imagination, and when it comes to conjuring up these ideas about otherworldly beings, taking seriously archaeology and the materiality and sensory visual qualities of life in the ancient world, so that we can better understand what these texts were trying to say about this deity.
Wow. I need to warn our audience, I don't know if I will have time to get into your questions. So forgive me if you're super chatting questions, I will try, but this is an episode, I only have 60 minutes. So please, I've been waiting for 3-4 months to maybe longer than that, actually, since I first tried to reach out, but for this particular book. So please bear with me as we get into the content. One of the things that we should consider when we look at this is how, for example, Christians interpret the "let us make man in our image" as the Trinity, right? We know from looking at this, that is not in its original context what is being said. We know that is interpretation coming later. We do the same thing, allegorizing or anthropomorphizing things to make it seem like, well, that's he's just trying to make it relatable so you can understand, as you fickle little humans are, trying to grasp this God. And that's how I always read the Bible. But in this book, you're literally going into the anatomy of everything about God.
Yeah, I think that's the main point of the book, is the best way to dislodge our Christianized assumptions, because whether we're believers or not, I'm not a religious person at all.
Me neither.
But whether we're believers or not, this collection of ancient texts has really shaped our own cultural assumptions and views. And as a means of trying to destabilize that kind of Christianized Western cultural view, I'm trying to say, look, one of the biggest differences between the God that's being written about in these ancient texts and the God that Jewish and Christian people worship today is that, the ancient deity had a body. He was understood to be human shaped. His body was far more kind of glamorous and much more hyper masculine in a lot of ways. But it was human shaped. So just as, he is said to have created humans in his own image, it means it's a visual correspondence. That's what makes, humans special, according to this particular ideological worldview, is that we're better than animals because we're God-shaped, just as God is human-shaped. And so that's what I'm trying to explain in this book. So I tell the story of God, his early history, if you like, his early career, by anatomizing him. And I start with his feet and I work all the way up his body to his genitals, his backside, his innards, his chest, his arms, his face, his hands, his legs, the whole kind of package.
Yeah, you do. You definitely do. It gets explicit in some places. I'm like, whoa, but that's the ancient world. So can you briefly, just for the sake of it, your book goes into depth, and I get it. We have to be brevities are what we have to run with here. God before the Bible is something you also deal with. And what I mean is the God that we see in the Bible wasn't originally in the Bible. This is something older. Can you briefly tell us about that and how that can maybe shape the picture of how we should view the God of the Bible? Yeah.
So the short answer is that the texts that we have in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, but particularly in the Hebrew Bible, so Old Testament, were written over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and they've been reshaped and recrafted over time. But they're drawing on some of them are drawing on much older traditions and mythologies. And so the example that you gave, some Christians read into God saying, "Let us make man in our own image." They read into that the notion of the Trinity. The Trinity is not even really a proper notion in the New Testament, let alone, obviously, it's not in the Hebrew Bible at all. So, as I was saying, this God of Judaism and Christianity is a post-biblical creation. So the deity that we find reflected in these biblical texts is a deity who was very much part and parcel of a polytheistic system. He wasn't this solitary deity. He was networked into a much broader household, if you like, of deities. We have one particular text in the book of Deuteronomy. It's a very old piece of almost like fossilized poetry that sort of speaks of a mythology whereby Yahweh, who becomes known as the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, was originally a son. You know, he had a dad. His dad was El, the high god, who was, you know, the high god in the Levantine part of the world. And originally, you know, Yahweh was simply kind of one of that younger generation of deities, a son of a high god and high goddess, who gradually, in this particular part of the southern Levant that we now know as modern Israel, Palestine, Jordan, that this particular deity sort of eventually sort of slowly starts to kind of take over a lot of the roles and functions of this high god. He basically, you know, you could say in theory he kind of overthrows his own father, as is very typical in a lot of ancient mythology. But that's how it starts. So this was a god that originally had a dad, and he had a consort, a wife, the goddess Asherah. And he was, you know, he was the head by get to the time of the Iron Age, so say around about the 9th century BCE. He was pretty much the head of his own local pantheons. But there were other deities and divine beings worshipped alongside him in those pantheons. So a lot of the regulations that we read in the Bible, you shall not have any other gods, I'm a jealous God, these are all later reflections of a prioritization of this deity that have been retrojected back into the story of the religious past that the Bible presents. So yeah, it's a very different kind of divine world, if you like, than the one that we might imagine.
If I were to put a guess on this, because scholars don't like guessing, but for the sake of guessing, because, you know, you wouldn't put this in paper and say, this is the truth. If you were to put a guess on when that happened, when it became this God, only this God, not even getting into when does he become kind of philosophized outside of space and time, which takes place eventually. When would you say what you're describing there takes place, this regulation to like cut off and become purely monotheistic, if you put a guess on it?
Okay, so with all the kind of scholarly footnoting and nuancing that I'm, you know, instinctively feel the need to give, I would say around about, say, 500 BCE. That's when you start to get this emphasis on worshipping Yahweh alone. But that's only among these particular kind of scribal communities that are quite elite, quite high status. So we know that not everybody in this part of the world that worshipped Yahweh was thinking the same. You know, we know a similar kind of time. You've got a group of Yahweh worshippers on an island in the Nile called Elephantine, who have built a temple to Yahweh, and they're worshipping other deities alongside Yahweh there. So it's not that this was a kind of a blanket sort of shift in theology or ideology, but it's the one that became dominant because it's these particular scribal groups, it's their texts that became so authoritative within Jerusalem and in certain communities in Mesopotamia. And with that kind of authority came a gradual change, I guess, in the way in which this deity was understood.
Wow. Yeah, there's so many interesting things that come from this book. I like will always keep talking about this throughout the video. So I hope everyone sees like, okay, I got to get this. I'm not kidding. And if you can't read, get it on Audible. Listen to it on Audible. It's read by her. So it's
I apologize in advance for that as well.
No, it was really good, actually. I enjoyed it. So we're going to get a little explicit here, because if I'm going to be honest, YouTube is going to probably slap me in the face on this video and really not monetize it. So your super chats are greatly appreciated to compensate for the not being able to advertise this video. Just letting you know. We're going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about God's dick. Okay. I'm going to be blunt. We're going to be adults here. This is something that came up and it so blew my mind, because I've read this over and over. I've read the Bible, like fundamentalists, just hardcore into my Bible. And you're taking me into passages where I'm like, what? How did I not even think like this? And there were like statements that you talk about, euphemisms and things that or idioms and euphemisms, things like that, that are really obviously speaking about something further. Let's start outside the Bible for our people who want to go, well, give me evidence of that. I don't buy it. It's not in the Bible. El, you talk about this story about El and two goddesses. Yeah. And El is Jerkin McGurkin. I'm just going to be code word here the best I can. And these goddesses are impressed that his thing shoots to the heaven. Can you tell us about this briefly?
Yeah, I mean, this is like quite a standard motif in a lot of ancient Southwest Asian mythology, in which any kind of high god, a creator god especially, is essentially a fertility god. Fertility was a particularly masculine attribute of both deities and human males in the ancient world. And so any high god, fertility god, creator god worth his salt is equipped with, you know, a sizable penis, and it's a penis that's incredibly potent and fertile. And so we find in a lot of these mythological texts, like both from, so this particular example about ale is from the city-state of Ugarit, which is on the coast of what's now modern-day Syria, to the Mediterranean coast. So around 14th century to 12th century BCE is when this particular city-state was at its height. And this was a god who kind of, you know, performed a kind of a masturbation sex act to entice these two young goddesses to have sex with him, and they completely buckle. They're incredibly impressed with it, have sex with him, they both get pregnant, and they give birth to these to more deities. And, you know, and this is quite normal in the sense that to have deities that, you know, there was no kind of embarrassment or hesitation about the idea that your gods could be sexually active. They were sexual beings. They were sexually active. They enjoyed sex. They also used sex violently as well. So they were very human-like in their sexuality, essentially. So that's just, you know, just bog standard, normal kind of stuff that gods get up to. But then when we read in the Hebrew Bible about the nature of this deity, we find that this too is a deity who is sexualized. This is a very masculine god. This is a god who's, as I've said, you know, very much human-shaped. And he has male anatomy. He has, you know, a term that's, a lot of ancient texts like to employ euphemism and wordplay and poetry, just because that was a convention of the time. So, for example, certain body parts stand in for other parts. So thighs and feet are often euphemisms for genitals. The lips are often euphemisms for the vagina, you know, quite obviously. You know, nakedness or flesh is often a euphemism for the genitals as well. So, you know, we read certain texts where we get these clear allusions to Yahweh's genitals. One of them is in Ezekiel chapter 1, where the prophet sees this human-shaped God, his deity Yahweh, sitting on the throne, and the deity's body is covered with fire and lights and all sorts of kind of wondrous cosmic splendors. Top half of his body is covered, the bottom half of his body is covered, but the bit that's revealed are his loins, which is, you know, that's the usual translation, but actually the word means, is quite straightforward, it's genitals. So, you know, this was a deity who was equipped like any other male creator fertility deity. He had a penis and he knew what to do with that.
It's so bold. It's so bold. I love it. Doesn't he say to Job, gird up thy loins like a man, like isn't this grab your cojones, we would say? Like, yeah, grab your balls?
It means like harden your balls, like harden up, like kind of get ready. Wow. It's a very masculine image, yeah.
I used to hear this in the church and they would say, well, all they did was they tucked their tunic. That's all. They tucked their tunic. And I'm thinking to myself, my dad.
Oh, yeah, they're just wrapping themselves. They're just like tightening their tunic so they can run. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I heard. And my dad, like, we still do this today. He'll be like, grab your balls, son. You know, like he's just tough, masculine alpha male from special forces, military, retired and all. So he's like, eh. And so warfare. Let me give you one example. I'm going to cover something here real quick as we get into this. And I'm going to show this little image to get your personal thoughts on this here. So we can take a look here. So in particular, my buddy Steven, he brought this to our attention. There was a discussion about your book in one of these rooms. Your book points out a potential mistranslation of a Hebrew word shol, which is understood to refer to the hem or a robe or to a robe itself. You suggest that it's better understood as originally referring to genitalia. You cite examples of where the term in question is used to refer to genitalia, but when reviewing the examples, it seems like the term in context refers to the garment covering the genitalia rather than the genitalia, and the LXX translated many of these examples as references into Greek as buttocks. Can you explain what's going on?
Yeah, in short, yeah. So quite often what's going on in the Masoretic text or in the Hebrew Bible text is that you quite often get the notion that it's so elastic are these idioms and euphemisms that you get the idea that even something that, you know, so in the prophetic text, this word shul tends to be used for genitalia, primarily female genitalia, because that's what gets talked about the most in the Hebrew Bible, because normally it's in context of misogyny and condemnation and sexual violence. So let's just get that out there. These are very masculinist texts written by men for men. But yeah, so quite often with these euphemisms, you get it's almost like you get a sense of an extension, so that by lifting a woman's skirts, you're exposing her genitalia. So you get a slippage, like an overlap. So for example, another example of a body part where you get a similar kind of thing happening is when Yahweh says, I hurl my shoe on Edom. That basically means he is trampling on Edom, but the shoe and the foot are so closely associated, it's almost as if one is an extension of the other. And that's exactly what's happening in those Masoretic texts there. By the time you get to the Greek translation, so the Septuagint, which is produced around the 3rd to 2nd centuries BCE, by the time you're getting to that kind of context, you're already starting to have this real resistance towards both the idea of a bodily deity, but also a resistance towards the idea of a discomfort, much more of a discomfort with these sorts of explicit body parts, these kind of genital body parts. And so you get layer upon layer upon layer of euphemism building, if you like, an interpretation.
Wow. Yeah, I could see them hiding this. You mentioned the bow, right? I'm going into certain examples that I thought were interesting as I read along. The bow that is the promise, I will not flood any longer, right? This rainbow. It represents a war bow too.
Yeah.
Sex and war are related. Sex and war. My question was simply, is that bow a euphemism for God's penis?
Yeah, but it's a euphemism, but it's also again, it's kind of doing double duty, a bit like the example we just talked about. So a lot of scholars agree that a lot of that Genesis material early on that talks about creation and the flood is obviously riffing off much older Mesopotamian stories. So we all know there were older versions of the flood story that was circulating around, much older. So in one of those collections of mythological ideas about the origins of the world is the story of Marduk, the god of Babylon, who defeats Tiamat, this shape-shifting kind of primeval goddess of salt water. And he defeats her with various, the world is created, the cosmos is created from her dismembered body parts, basically. But in the process of that battle, one of the things that Marduk uses against her is his war bow called Deluge. And quite often Babylonian scribes would just summarize the story by just saying, oh yeah, Tiamat, who Marduk defeated with his penis. So his war bow was equated with his penis. They were both symbols of ferocious, hyperpotent, aggressive masculinity. And these were, the bow is a penetrative weapon. I mean, you don't need to be a genius to kind of follow through the idiom in that sense. So yeah, when we have this little kind of image of Yahweh's bow, his rainbow is doing double duty as both a war bow and a rainbow as a kind of constellation, if you like, in the sky. But it's also alluding to this very much older mythic motif of one god defeating basically watery chaos, flood, with the penis. And you kind of get that rainbow imagery also in that Ezekiel text I just mentioned, where like when the prophet is looking at the genitals of God, he's couching it in terms of a rainbow. So you're kind of like, okay, yeah. So you can see that correlation between like a divine bow, a penis, and a rainbow. So there's all sorts of kind of overlaying of mythic ideas, literary devices and euphemisms, poetic texts and intertextual readings of different sorts of texts too, that have formed these particular biblical stories.
And it's not coincidence that the cherubim are covering their lower parts on purpose in the presence of God's exposing his glorious parts.
Yeah, they're
right?
the seraphim.
The seraphim, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So like the seraphim are like these kind of, scholars weren't quite sure what they were, but kind of looking at iconography, ancient iconography, most scholars are agreed that the seraphim are these kind of like, their name means burning ones, but they're also closely associated with serpent-like creatures with wings. And so you have this in Isaiah 6, again, the prophet sees the deity sitting on a throne and he's surrounded by these seraphim, and they're flying around. And we're told that, with two sets of wings, that, they fly and then they cover their genitals with another set of wings. Because, that's exactly what you do in the presence of this deity when he's sitting there on a throne. Because that's exactly what Israelite high priests do. They're instructed to wear underpants in the presence of the deity, so even though they're in probably like long hemmed robes, they are still instructed to wear underpants. You can't be kind of you can't be flaunting. You have to kind of camouflage your own genitalia in the presence of the better endowed deity.
Wow. So one note you mentioned in your book is there's this modern example of Donald Trump, and that was a great example, because we heard North Korea was gonna end up pressing this button and drop nukes on us, and Donald Trump wrote back flexing like a masculine male alpha. He's like, first of all, we have much bigger nukes, if you know what I mean, and our button works. So this is an example, you said, in a modern context where two males are competing, acting like, plus there's warfare in the mix of saying my junk's bigger than your junk.
Yeah, so I'm basically trying to make the point. I mean, that opens one of the chapters about, there's quite a few chapters on the genitals in this book, but that opens one of the chapters, and I try to make the point that military hardware, in every sense, has always been very much associated with a certain kind of physical, sexualized masculinity, and that we see that in our own context as much, so it's penis bragging, and we see that in our own context today as much as we see it in the ancient world.
Point blank question, did Yahweh impregnate Eve? Your book gets into something like this as well, so it sounds like the language implies
there is the potential to wonder as to whether there is, lying behind that story of Eve, is there basically goddess myths. I mean, she shares, she is the mother of all living, which is a title that's very similar to a title of Yahweh, of Aal's wife, who later becomes Yahweh's wife, if you like, Ugarit. She seems, her close association with this tree of life. We know that the tree of life was an important motif within goddess cultures and iconographies. So you kind of look like this is interesting. There looks like there's something behind here. What we have in the text is that she is very much cast as a human. She's cast as a creature. She is a creature of God. She's created by the deity from Adam. But there's a very interesting, in chapter 4, verse 1. We're told that Adam knew his wife, which is again a euphemism, a sexual euphemism. But what she says is so striking, because Eve says, "I have," and the Hebrew is normally translated as "I have gotten a man with the help of Yahweh," but actually the Hebrew is much more accurately translated as "I have created," or even procreated, a man with Yahweh. It's using a particular Hebrew root that has a cognate in Ugaritic, which is the language, and that's the word that a lot of goddesses use in talking about this kind of the perpetuation, the creation and perpetuation of life. So it's interesting. So it's kind of, it hints at a backstory. So I'm not saying yes, that's what it definitely says in the text. I'm saying it hints at an interesting backstory, perhaps, that perhaps Yahweh fathered the first child. I mean, Yahweh is a fertility god. Yahweh fathers other children much more comfortably, theologically, within the Hebrew Bible. He has this daughter who is kind of born from his wet breath, this wisdom goddess-like figure, in the book of Proverbs, for example, and that's picked up in later Jewish texts as well. There's lovely poetry in, again, the book of Deuteronomy that talks about him fathering a child called Jeshurun, who he looks after in the wilderness, and he holds and gazes at this child. The image conjured in the poetry is gorgeous. He's looking at this child so intently, and he says, "You became," what's normally translated as, "This little boy was the apple of my eye." We use an English idiom to render a Hebrew idiom, which much more literally means, "I gazed upon you like the little man in my eye." So it's referring to that little reflection you can see, when you're like up close, really close to something, you can see yourself reflect in someone's eyeball. Mm-hmm. That's that image. It's God's eyeball. It's like he can see this little child imprinted. I mean, it's a beautiful, touching kind of image of this very tender, intimate parental scene. So yeah, there are other instances where, Yahweh has children.
I was thinking about that El situation with the goddesses, and I wonder if that's where Yahweh was born. I don't know. I'm being funny because people are like, they really have to get the book. I mean, if you really want to get into this, they have to. I can't brag about it enough, because there's so much. I told you before we started this episode with 60 Minutes, you're going to like require me to walk on water if we're going to actually get through this book. And I just don't think it's possible. So circumcision. And then what I want to do, because I'd love to have you come back and let's plan this in April, like we talked about. I'm going to ask one more little thing. And then I really beg everyone to get this and email me. Tell me what you thought about the book. If you think it's crap, tell me why. I want to hear why, but I doubt, you're probably coming from a faith community if you think so. This is really amazing. My last one is circumcision. I wanted to kind of probe this with you for a second before I just go to questions, because I was tempted to just run this episode out with you. And then since we don't have much time to get into questions, let's do this early here. Circumcision. The question is, God's penis was circumcised according to the Jews. Can you tell us the origins, you think, of circumcision and what it means? I mean, I know there's not like a definitive, but what are the origins of circumcision? Where does this come from? And
well, in terms of origins, we don't know. So we're talking about male circumcision here.
Right.
There's no hint of female circumcision in the Bible, nor is there much hint of female circumcision in other parts of the ancient world. I mean, you get a lot of really xenophobic traditions within Greek and Roman texts about, that sometimes female circumcision was practiced in some kind of exotic groups in Egypt, but we have no evidence for that. It seems to be something that happens, is unrelated, if you like, to male circumcision, to the Jewish practice of male circumcision. So male circumcision, we don't know the origins. It looks to be in those indigenous cultures or pre-industrial cultures that practice male circumcision. It's often, not always, but often associated as with puberty. So it's almost like a coming of age rite for boys as they become men. Some cultures do carry out male circumcision on infant males. Again, sometimes it seems to be a kind of, it's almost like marking their personhood. At what point do these infants become people in their own right, individuals with, are they understood as persons, social beings in their own right, as distinct from the bodies of their mothers or whatever? So in some contexts, circumcision can happen then too. I mean, but the way it seems to function in these ancient Israelite and Judahite traditions that gave rise to the Hebrew Bible is that it seems to be associated with fertility. So in other words, it makes the penis more productive. So for example, just as fruit trees in the book of Leviticus, I said, the Israelites were instructed in the Torah to circumcise their fruit trees after a certain number of years because it will give a bigger yield, it will give a bigger crop of fruit. So a similar idea seems to pertain to the circumcision of the penis, that it's almost like it opens the penis and makes it more fertile. So there looks to be a suggestion whereby what perhaps started off as a puberty rite or a coming of age rite in some way was sort of transferred onto much earlier stage of life. The other interesting thing about circumcision is that it seems to play a part in counteracting the dangerous impurity of postpartum blood. So when a woman in the Torah regulations, when a woman gives birth to a baby, she's unclean for a set number of days and then a set number of weeks after that. If she gives birth to a baby boy, her time being unclean is shorter than if she gives birth to a baby girl. So it's almost as if the circumcision of her baby boy after 7 days almost compensates in some way for the dirtiness. And I mean ritual dirtiness here. This is just about ritual impurity. It's not about hygiene. It's not about social impurity or moral impurity. It's just simply about, can she enter into sacred space? Can she participate in certain rituals? That's all it means. But yes, it looks like male circumcision plays a big role in both fertility ideas, but also ideas about ritual purity.
I also wanted to ask you in that vein about child sacrifice that gets, I see that circumcision seems to kind of replace it in a way. It becomes
one of the things. Yeah. So again, in the Torah, my doctoral dissertation was on child sacrifice, and that was my first book. It's a really tricky topic, but yeah, basically in the Torah, you get various regulations about, because Yahweh is a fertility God and he wants his cut of the crop, whether it's human or agricultural or animal. So that's why you have to give a certain, the firstborn of your flocks and the first fruits of your agricultural crops. And you also, by, same reckoning, owe him the firstborn of your children, because he is the fertility god. He has rendered you fertile to have these children, these animals, these crops. So circumcision on the 8th day which is when you're meant to offer up the firstborn animals and the first crops. Circumcision in some Torah texts functions almost like as a substitute ritual that means that you don't have to obviously go ahead and sacrifice your child. There are other substitute rituals as well. You can donate the child to the temple, you can pay money to the temple, you can sacrifice an animal instead, but it seems to play this kind of apotropaic function. So in other words, it protects from harm, and the harm in this case is Yahweh.
Wow. Okay, enough from me. Final plug in terms till we leave the show. You must go and get this book, okay? Or Yahweh's coming after you. You don't even know, like it's happening. And I cannot swear by this enough. In fact, I'm replacing this with my King James Bible. I've like totally like thrown away my Bible and keeping this. This is amazing, and we have barely scratched the surface. I know it seems like we're pretty much rated R here right now, and that's okay. So let's do the super chats if you're okay with that. And fingers crossed we can get them done within 25 minutes. So here we go. Scott Duke, thank you for the super chat, my friend. Darn it, I have a meeting at this time slot. I'll watch later, but thanks for having Dr. S on today. What I've read so far of it is wonderful. You're not lying.
Thank you, Scott.
Scholarvid, thoughts on the Pentateuch being essentially the merger of two separate oral traditions: Moses' story from Egypt, Abraham's story from Mesopotamia?
Nah. I think the key thing is that these are all you have two, rather than them being oral traditions. We have lots of different literary traditions. I agree that most of them are, what we seem to have is two sorts of cultural preferences, if you like, both of which, so whether it's kind of being freed from enslavement in Egypt or whether it's coming from Mesopotamia, it's all about the idea that these people started off outside the land and had to come into the land. And that's reflecting the experience of the times when these people were writing these things down, which is when, which was like, 600 BCE, 500 BCE, when a lot of these writers had experience being outside the land and were coming back or coming into the land. So yeah, not so much oral traditions, but certainly I think ancestors, so patriarchs and Moses and Exodus, I think they were originally separate and had been brought together. Yeah, but not as oral traditions, I don't think.
Thank you. Yeah, this brings to mind a whole bunch of stuff we just don't have time to get into, because I'll be selfish if I ask any more questions, because it gets off into all sorts of stuff I'm sure you have answers for that I really hope to get at some point. Secular Rarity, thank you for the super chat, my friend. Dr. Stavrakopoulou is awesome. Love her work. Thank you both for this dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's scroll down. And sorry. Stop scamming, man. I have a question for Professor Stavrakopoulou. Please, I don't see it, my friend. I was looking here. The next one, Scott Duke. Slightly off topic. What is Dr. S take on child sacrifice among Canaanites and Manasseh? Did it take place routinely? Thanks.
So as I said, this was my doctoral dissertation on Manasseh and child sacrifice, interestingly, as the most kind of villainous person in the Hebrew Bible and the most villainous practice. Yes, I think child sacrifice was in some contexts a reality. What we mean by child, we might not, what we mean by child and what ancient peoples mean by child can be quite different. But like any human society across the world, at some point, any culture has engaged in some kind of human sacrifice of some sort. So yeah, Manasseh, I think he was a great king, historically speaking. I think he is one of the few kings that we can sort of say, yep, did exist. We have references to him in Neo-Assyrian texts, for example. He wasn't a baddie. I think he's been vilified. I argued in my thesis, he's been vilified in the Hebrew Bible because he's got a northern name, as opposed to the southern kingdom of Judah and Jerusalem. He's the only king with a northern name. The north had fallen by the time he was on the throne. And I think that later biblical writers and editors are basically just trying to put the blame for the whole thing, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, exile from land, just because the dude has got a northern name. So Yeah, so I think that's what's going on there. But yeah, child sacrifice. There are some really interesting parallels with the sorts of practices that we find going on in Phoenician and Punic colonies, where it's very hard to argue that archaeologically that evidence suggests that these were children that had died of natural causes, or children that were stillborn. There's a real range of kids, young kids, aged 2 and under, and newborns. So we know it was happening there. A lot of the language, the technical terminology that's used archaeologically that we found inscribed on these monuments that mark these cremated remains of babies matches the language that's used of Molech, this character Molech in the Hebrew Bible, who is said to be a god, this god of child sacrifice. I don't think he was a Canaanite god of child sacrifice. I think Molech is a biblical character invented in place of what was a mulk, not Molech, a mulk sacrifice, a royal kind of sacrifice of children.
We have to do another show about your every book you have. I have to do shows because I have to read all of them. I know that this has got to be, you're just a gold mine of information that I love. Doc Pleroma, thank you for the super chat. Thoughts on some Jewish scholars rendering of Selah in Genesis 2:21 as penis bone rather than ribs? The LXX uses plura, and Besar, I hope I'm saying that right, Basar, would be the implied Hebrew word. Yeah,
well, it's a really interesting discussion. What we have in the Hebrew text is a word that basically means side. What some scholars have argued, and in the Greek, it suggests it's some kind of fleshy bit. It's a side or a fleshy bit. Some scholars, and in fact, a colleague, a lovely man, a guy called Zayuni Zavit, has wrote a few years ago suggesting that actually what the Hebrew term selah actually means is penis bone, and he argued on the basis of that certain monkeys don't have little bones in their penises, so that they're always erect essentially, whereas obviously in other mammals, male mammals including humans, you need to rely on the penis being engorged with blood in order to make it hard so that it can penetrate. But some monkeys have a bone in there, and other animals, but mainly monkeys. So yeah, that was Zavit's proposal. I don't think it works in terms of the Hebrew. I think it makes complete sense to understand that a bit of Adam was taken away, particularly because of the way that Adam was created. He's Yahweh's a clay shaper. He basically makes a clay figurine of Adam. And we know that whenever you've got gods doing anything with clay, they're always pinching pieces off. So the goddesses in one of the myths about, in Atrahasis, about the creation of humans, with the god Enki and the goddess Mammi, she basically pinches off 14 pieces of clay, and then they create 7 males and 7 females. And so I think here we've got that image of Yahweh kind of pinching off a bit of the fleshy clay, the side of Adam, to create Eve. So I think that's what's probably going on in the Hebrew.
There's so much here that I'd love to get into, but this is amazing to think about here in particular. I just did one with Dr. Joshua Bowen and Kip Davis on this topic, where we were talking about, is it a rib? Is it this? Is it that? And really interesting. Thank you for that answer. Melody Joy, super sticker. Thank you, sweetheart. I really appreciate the support and always cheerleading in the stands, helping me motivate me and keep me going. I appreciate it. Stop Scamming Man, what are your thoughts on the historicity of David in light of how 1st and 2nd Samuel seems to be making clumsy attempts to alibi David?
There's definitely a David rehabilitation thing going on in the books of Samuel and Kings. I mean, that's interesting. We were talking about the differences between were there escape from Egypt traditions with Moses, and were there patriarchal traditions about coming from Mesopotamia that brought together? Yeah, I think so. In this case, I think what we've got is almost like we had 2 separate traditions about who built the Jerusalem temple. Was it David or was it Solomon? And they've been deliberately brought together, and Solomon has become David's son. I think that's my opinion as to what's happening. In terms of historicity of David, we don't have enough evidence. I don't care what other biblical scholars say about the dating of a particular step structure in Jerusalem. That doesn't prove that King David existed. I think King David is more like a legendary figure, a bit like in England, we've got this idea of King Arthur, who, may well be a combination of based on some kind of local chieftain and, mixed in with lots of other traditions of folklore and magical places. I think we've got a similar kind of thing going on with David. But, the fact is that, he becomes the legendary ancestor of this royal house in Jerusalem, just like Jacob is the legendary ancestor of the people Israel. So it's not to say that, you know, that David, you know, the house of David wasn't an important notion in Iron Age Judah. I think it probably was, but I don't think the books of Samuel can tell us anything about the historicity of David.
Okay, I must ask in the vein of this question, thank you for reminding me, there's a million questions I have, and that's how bad it is. Trying to interview you is like sifting through 1,000 questions I have, and it's like, which one do I pick? You got into all of this initially because of Jesus studies. And that is something that really piqued my interest initially. You were like, hey, I wanted to possibly figure this out. So I'm putting you on the spot here. I'm putting you on the spot. I got to get your about Jesus historicity, because I was hardcore mythicist. Eileen, there was a guy. I don't know that there was. You kind of have to sift and think. I don't know. I'm asking you, no judgment, honestly. You're not a Jesus scholar, right? So you can't get in trouble for just making an opinion here. Where are you at on the question?
I think a Jesus, or Yeshu, or whatever you want to call him, a Yeshu. I mean, I lean towards probably there was a guy who was, you know, a very charismatic. You know, there was so many charismatic teachers wandering around, you know, in first century Palestine. So many of them. Holy the Circle Drawer was one of my personal favorites. But yeah, so there's probably, you know, in the same way that probably John the Baptizer or Immerser or whatever we might want to call him, there's probably based on some kind of historical figure too. But that Jesus that may have existed is not the Jesus that we find in any early Jewish and Christian writings. Just not. I mean, no. The guy just, yeah, no.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, man, you're awesome. Chendi, thank you for the super chat. I learned about God's wife Asherah from Dr. Stavrakopoulou. I'm also reading her recent book, God and Anatomy. Gotta get it. I'm telling you, learning a lot from the book. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
So sweet. Thank you so much for that compliment. Festering Boils, thank you for the super sticker. I hope we don't get festering boils. Stop scamming, man. Hi again. Is there any evidence of who killed Kerbet Gayatha?
This is a site, an archaeological site that Yossi Garfinkel, again a great scholar, archaeologist, and a colleague, he's been excavating there for a number of years. He thinks we need to identify this as so it's 10th century, looks to be 10th century BC, 11th century to 10th century BC. He thinks that we ought to understand this as being Israelite. Some say it could be Philistine. It's on that kind of border. I mean, basically, we don't know. Perhaps we know that Egypt was a major player for centuries and centuries in this part of the world, and we know that various pharaohs came up into the southern Levant and kicked ass several times. So yeah, quite feasibly it could be a pharaoh. So Sheikh, doubt it, because I think there are real problems in trying to link him with various other things. So yeah, in short, no, there's not any compelling evidence to suggest why that we have certain evidence of destruction layers. We don't know, but you know, there was all sorts of stuff kicking off in this part of the world and at that time, so it's very difficult to say, you know, who is responsible for which destruction.
Thank you. Sid Dave, if Judaism is false, then Christianity and Islam are automatically false. Jesus cannot be the Messiah if the parent religion is itself false. Thank you for the statement.
Yeah, I mean, false and true. So, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, I'm not here to kind of, you know, rain on anybody.
Debunk everybody, yeah.
Like, you know, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you know, if I haven't got a problem with people that are believers, but yeah, I mean, personally, I obviously I don't think that Jesus was the Messiah, and even the notion of a Messiah was really slippery. You know, Messiah, it simply means anointed one, and it's exactly the word that's used of Cyrus the Great in the book of Isaiah. You know, it's exactly the word that's used of cult objects like the standing stone that Jacob erects at Bethel in the book of Genesis. So it had a very long and again very elastic kind of usage. So yeah.
Yeah, we didn't even get into standing stones. There's so much stuff that you talk about that's amazing in this book. Stop Scamming Man. I developed some study material. Rainbows, bows, penis. Also have it would have blocked his super chat probably if you tried to put the word. I don't know. Also have what is this?
Oxyrhynchus papyri. Yeah, so this is a site in Egypt. It's basically an ancient rubbish dump. and scholars found just stacks and stacks and stacks of ancient manuscripts, loads and loads of Greek stuff, so some properly, some ancient Greek literature, copies of texts like, bits of Homer and stuff, but also bits of biblical texts, including some very early Christian manuscripts, some tiny bits of the Gospels that are now canonized in the New Testament, but also other early, some of the stuff that didn't get into the New Testament. So I'm not completely up to speed on the latest on Oxyrhynchus, I have to say, in terms of the study of Israelite faith. They're much more interesting in terms of the study of the emergence of the Jesus movement and the emergence of Christianity, because there you have, I talk about one of the Oxyrhynchus texts in the book, actually. I talk about, it's got a real nasty portrayal of Jesus. He's basically being quite unpleasant in this particular tradition that's not in the gospel accounts at all. But, you do find similar sorts of bad boy, nasty Jesus in the non-canonical gospels. So, yeah, they're great. It's fantastic source of information just to look at how diverse the Jesus movement was and stories that were being told about Jesus and his disciples. It's a fantastic collection.
Thank you so much. Bob, thank you for the super chat. Thanks for your scholarly work, a creative and comprehensive study of Yahweh and his Mesopotamian counterparts, a must read.
That's why I wrote it. Partly it's because there are so many people out there that are so interested, and you don't get told this kind of stuff. That's why I went to university, because I was never told this stuff, and it was the stuff that I wanted to find out about. So I just, if I can make it more fun.
Yeah, I just want to show pictures while you're talking, because
there are some beautiful illustrations in the book. But yeah, I take very seriously the idea of setting Yahweh in his ancient cultural, social context. And so, a lot of what I discuss is drawing comparisons and allusions to all sorts of other deities and divine beings in this part of the world.
I wonder if El looked like that, because, I know Baal is obviously one, this is El, sorry. I'm talking about Yahweh. We just don't have a depiction of Yahweh. This is El. So
I imagine that his worshippers pretty much thought he looked something very much like that.
Wow. It's amazing what your book does. David, thank you for the super chat. Wow, thank you both for all the great work. Really enjoying the conversation. I'll definitely be getting the book. Question, was God circumcised? I think.
Yeah, the answer to that is the early rabbis said, yeah, of course he was. That's why we know that, the early rabbis were much more comfortable. So, so they're writing around, sort of, say the 1st century, 2nd century CE, up to around, 6th century. And they're really comfortable with the idea of a corporeal God, really comfortable. And one of the reasons why we know that they thought that God was circumcised is because the rabbis were kind of scratching their heads and having these big debates. They were worrying about the fact that Adam and Noah aren't said to be circumcised in the Bible. So what does that mean? That's terrible. Does that mean that God created Adam circumcised or uncircumcised? The rabbis were really kind of anxious about this. And they, and the answer was quite simple. The answer was, well, it tells us in the text, it says, and God created man in his own image. And they said, well, so he must have created Adam circumcised, because we know that God was circumcised. So, that's typical. I love that. It's typical rabbinic reasoning.
Exactly.
But yeah, so yes, God was circumcised.
I can't remember the example, but one of the other examples is like they were disputing if somebody did something, and I can't remember, I'm going to butcher it, but it's that kind of reasoning where it's like, yeah, but would he ever leave without his hat or whatever it was? Of course he wouldn't.
So that's like, how does Yahweh pray? Well, he puts on a Torah, a shawl as well, and he wears tefillin, and of course he does, because that's what we do. So basically it's about the correspondence. That's what a lot of this book is about. It's about saying there's a very intimate correspondence between human worshippers and their deity, and what the deity does they do, and what they do the deity does. And so and that's what makes it really fun. Isn't it a much better way of thinking about God than like the kind of boring kind of like, oh, he's not really there, and do you know what I mean? It's just it's much more engaging. And that's the point. This socialized the deity. Like, how do you have a social relationship with either an imaginary being or an abstract? Well, you can't. And so you socialize by means of body language and body talk and conjuring a visual idea that this God had a body. And that's exactly what these ancient worshippers did, like any other ancient worshippers worshipping their deities. So that's why
your opening actually goes into that very well. Digital Hammurabi, who is this amazing professor, and how did you find her? Well, all credit to you, my friends.
I recognize that name.
I don't know if it's Megan or if it's Josh. Doesn't matter. They have multiple interviews with her. Go watch them after this. You're going to want to see their interviews as well. Thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. Let's try and wrap this up as we get through these, because you only have like 7 minutes or so. Back Rent, thanks for all you do. Keep up the strong work, both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I was going to mention a couple things, but let's see if we can get through these, and then boom. Aramgard, thoughts on the story of Jacob wrestling with God?
Oh, it's a great story. Yeah, it's drawing on lots of different kind of mythic ideas and features. I think the river location is really interesting. It's a very liminal space. It's dangerous. It's nighttime. You don't trespass in the place of some kind of it's almost like it's a river god kind of marking this crossing. But then on the other hand, this is God. This is, we're told in the text, he says, I have seen God. And God says, all right, I'll let go of you. And actually in that story, when Jacob gets when he gets hurt in the hip.
Oh, I was going to ask you.
It's not the hip. God basically goes for the ghoulies.
Oh, wow.
I think definitely it's a really another nice story about one of the patriarchs or the ancestors' encounters with this deity. Like Abraham walks along the road with him. Moses goes up Sinai with the elders and sees the God of Israel, sees his feet, and they sit down and have dinner with him. They have this ritual meal at the top of Sinai when they see the God of Israel. It's great stuff. It's amazing stuff in these texts. I just wish people could see it for see what it says. It's there in the text.
It's so much more amazing knowing everybody has an outside of space and time. And it's like, have you been reading your book? Have you actually read your own book? Anyway, Bob, can you elaborate on what you call the radical form of pantheon reduction that occurred among the Israelites? Over what period did this take place?
Yeah, see, this is what we just don't know about. So I'd say around about, 5th century BCE. So the Jerusalem temple was destroyed. But before that, and that really, when you get temple destruction, and don't forget, these texts are written by elite high status scribal groups. So they're not reflective of the whole, of the general kind of, man and woman in the street, or on their farms, more to the point. So when temples are destroyed, they really do impact the religious and political well-being and the way in which you imagine the world, the cosmos to function. And so you either say that your God has been defeated, or you say that, your God has done this to you on purpose. And that's the way that, particularly when the Jerusalem temple was destroyed in the 6th century BCE by the Babylonians, that's the way that these elites, the part of this temple community who were exiled to Mesopotamia, that's how a lot of them tried to understand it. They said, well, God must have done this on purpose. He's deliberately abandoned us. And that's what we read in the book of Ezekiel. You get this image of Yahweh on his mobile throne with wheels and, cherubim wheeling himself out of the temple to kind of abandon it.
The Ark of the Covenant, you also say, potentially was his throne.
Yeah, exactly. So it's already a mobile deity. And gods very often did abandon their temples because they were pissed off with their worshippers. Because worshippers, humans screw up all the time and the gods don't like it. So this radical form of pantheon reduction, I think I use that phrase because the term monotheism is deeply problematic. I mean, it's only been around since the 18th century or so, 17th, 18th century. What do we mean by that? It's a very Christianized term as well. It's about, belief in a one God. I mean, even there's no word for belief in the Hebrew Bible, for example. There's no word for marriage. There's no word for wife in the Hebrew Bible. So in a sense, there's no word for religion. That's the thing. We have all these kind of concepts that we sort of impose on the text. But what I think this form of radical pantheon reduction consisted of, this was the moment where, for certain biblical writers and priests and theologians and scribes, this was the point at which they thought Yahweh is so pissed off with us. It's because what we've been doing up till now has been wrong, worshipping other, all the other deities. The way we've been doing religion just doesn't work. So that's the point where you get a downgrading of certain members of Yahweh's pantheon. So Asherah is divorced, out on her rear. That's it. She's kind of downgraded to being merely an idolatrous cult symbol. Her cult symbol was called by her name as well, so they were interchangeable. Other sorts of deities get downgraded. So what the beings that later appear as the archangels, Gabriel and Raphael, I mean, these look to be downgraded, demoted versions of what were originally deities, minor deities probably, in an earlier form of an Israelite pantheon. So that's what I mean. They kind of get downgraded and reworked. It's a shame, isn't it?
It is. It is. My buddy Stephen told me in the Greek world, when women lost their virginity by a man piercing them with the penis, but men would lose their virginity in battle when they finally get struck with a sword or cut or sliced when they're pierced. Yes. Yes. So there's
ancient Greek cultures are very big on, who's penetrating who and how they're doing it and what's the relationship, the social relationship between these two people in terms of status and class and economics. Yeah. Wow. Really interesting.
Bill Castle, thank you for the super sticker. We're wrapping things up here. Mike Q, can you please name some charismatic leaders in the first century Palestine besides Jesus and John? Thanks.
Honi the circle drawer. He's my favorite. Look him up. Honi. Honi.
Who is it?
Honi the circle drawer.
He
draws circles, basically.
Wow. Okay.
That's one of his things.
Thank you so much. Converse Contender, is books significantly different from Bodies of God book?
I don't know what the Bodies of God book is.
I don't know, my friend. I don't know. Email me. Thank you so much. I was going to ask you about Jesus real quick here. My one black friend, hello, everyone. Are discoveries from ancient Greece a bit more special to you?
Anything to do with Greece is special to me because I'm half Greek. We're all biased. Do you know what I mean? And ancestry matters to all of us. So I'm more biased. So in the same way that I absolutely agree with, I know this is not true, but I absolutely agree with my dad when he says to me, sweetheart, the Greeks invented pizza. I'm like, yes, I believe that. The Italians stole it from the Greeks. The Romans stole it. Of course that's not true, but I like to believe it. So yeah, there are always certain things that are more special to me.
Cognitive dissonance works in wonderful ways. Exactly. Atheological, thank you so much, my friend. Derek Bennett. Francesca, did Yahweh light the Big Bang? You can be honest.
No.
Thank you so much, my friend. Mike says, your thoughts in God being spirit. John 4,
I talk about that in the book. I talk about that exact thing in the last chapter of the book.
We don't have time to go into it now,
spirit
my friend.
Was material. It was his breath.
Wow. Thank you so much. And the Afro-Humanist, thank you so much for that final one. My last question to you, just briefly, is Jesus being the Son of God. It takes a unique status in the New Testament, it seems, and he acts like no one has seen God. But reading the Hebrew Bible, he does. Does this lean into Marcionism, that this is a different deity? Or where do you stand on this issue, and how do you reconcile God having a body and physically? In what way was he a son? Is it more like Plutarch, where the idea is kind of more philosophical? Well,
it's not just philosophical in Plutarch. It's also, it has that material quality to it too. It's this very sort of Stoic idea that kind of, again, this pneuma, this spirit, has a generative, procreative quality about it. I think the way I say it, Son of God is a title that's all over the Hebrew, but it means a divine being in the Hebrew Bible. But then kings themselves, the kings in Jerusalem were known as most kings were across ancient Southeast Asia. They were the offspring of the gods. They understood this to be a social correspondence, not necessarily that they were biologically of the gods. It was about their role and function. So it's a ritual title, it's a social function, and all that. It's got all sorts of things going on with it. The idea of Son of God. But I think that Jesus seems to me, and I think this is what a lot of early Christians were struggling with, is that he's very much an Enoch character. And Enoch traditions were around for a lot longer than Jesus traditions have been around for. So in Enoch traditions, you get the idea of this one particular extraordinary human being who is divinized, who is taken up to heaven and becomes divine. And I think when you look at even the traditions that we have in the New Testament, look at what point does Jesus become divine? You seem to have the sense that in some traditions it starts only, like in Paul, it's only when he's resurrected, that death and resurrection, that's when he becomes divine. In other traditions that you find in the New Testament, the hint seems to be that, it was upon his baptism. That's when the Spirit, that's when he becomes kind of, zinged with this kind of divine quality and is transformed. And then you get the traditions that we find in Luke and in Matthew, in which he is born divine. It wasn't as extraordinary. It sounds weird, but it wasn't as extraordinary a quality as we think of it as being today. So even in Luke and in Luke's gospel, the idea is that John the Baptist, he is he's got this connection with Elijah from heaven, that Elijah plays a part in his conception. So he kind of carries this pneuma, this Holy Spirit or breath from the heavens anyway. Equally, some people were thinking that John the Baptist had been resurrected from the dead. That's in the New Testament. So I think it's not that it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary, but not that extraordinary in this kind of 1st century, 2nd century context. But yeah, the figure that's most like Jesus is Enoch. And those traditions have been circulating since at least the 3rd century BCE, if not longer.
Wow. Scott Duke said, I'm back. What did I miss? We'll start over for you, my friend. No, seriously. Francesca, thank you so much. Everybody, go get the book. If at the very least you should cancel your Playboy subscription, you should definitely get this book. It will handle all of that for you. No, I'm dead serious. This is one of the most remarkable books on the study of God that I've heard. And it's not like it's a complex, scholarly, you have to know these words to understand. She breaks it down for lay people to really understand it. And I'm not even completely finished with it. In fact, I'm towards the back here. I just got done with the arm of God, how they didn't know if he'd have the power to bring them back. And he stretches his right arm all the way into far distant places. Persia ends up having him go back home. Oh, God did get us back into the land. And there's a lot here. God has a literal body, and then it changes over time. We didn't get into sacrifices. How does he eat it? How is he eating these sacrifices? If these are for food, which makes me wonder if he was telling them to sacrifice their firstborns, was he eating their children too? These are grotesque ideas to think about. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Is there any final words you'd like to say to the 423 people watching right now?
No, just thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, as you said, I wrote this book for people that it's cool and exciting, this stuff, and I want people to share that excitement with me. That's why I wrote the book.
We have so much more to say. Ladies and gentlemen, go down in the description, get the book. You can't miss it. In fact, let me post it right now so everybody can just go there right now and get the book. I swear by this. I'm not kidding. This is if I've said anything, this is the one. Go get the book. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking in April if we can.
Yeah.
And never forget. Say that again?
That would be great. Yeah, definitely. I'll come back.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, do not forget, we are MythVision.